They laughed when she bid $1. No one else raised a hand, not for that decaying palace, not for the legend that every owner vanished before sunrise. But when the gavel struck, destiny changed forever. Claire Donnelly, divorced, broke, and desperate for a second chance, had just bought the most cursed estate in the country. Locals called it the house that swallowed kings. She called it hope, but the moment she crossed its rusted gates, the air shifted, and something inside the walls awakened something that had been waiting for her. They laughed when she bid $1. No one else raised a hand, not for that decaying palace, not for the legend that every owner vanished before sunrise. But when the gavel struck, destiny changed forever. Claire Donnelly, divorced, broke, and desperate for a second chance, had just bought the most cursed estate in the country. Locals called it the house that swallowed kings. She called it hope. But the moment she crossed its rusted gates, the air shifted, and something inside the walls awakened something that had been waiting for her. The morning had started with rain. Heavy, stubborn rain that dripped through the cracks of her car's broken windshield as she drove past the same pawnshops that had seen her every week for months. The same look from the clerk, the same small bills in exchange for what little she had left: her wedding ring, her camera, her grandmother's clock. The world had taken everything and yet somehow expected her to keep smiling. Her phone buzzed beside the steering wheel, a government auction alert. Abandoned property, starting bid, $1,000. She almost laughed. $1,000 wasn't even enough to pay her last month's overdue rent. But then she saw the picture, a sprawling, vine-choked mansion at the edge of Ravencourt Hills, towers reaching into fog, stone angels leaning as if exhausted from centuries of waiting. She whispered the address to herself, a strange pull forming in her chest. Ravencourt Estate. The name tasted like dust and history. By noon, she was there, standing beneath a leaking canopy outside the courthouse, where a few soaked bidders huddled with their umbrellas. Most were there for foreclosed apartments, storage lots, or scraps of land. No one cared for the old estate except a thin, hollow-eyed man from the back who muttered that the place was cursed since the fire. When her name was called, Claire hesitated. Her entire life, she'd avoided risks. Every choice made safe, predictable, small. But the smallness had suffocated her, her marriage, her dreams, her future. She raised her hand. 1,000. Silence fell. The auctioneer blinked, clearing his throat as if he hadn't heard right. "You're aware of the condition of the property, ma'am?" "I am," she said softly. No one countered. Not one person wanted that ruin. And with the hollow thud of a wooden gavel, the estate and whatever slept within it became hers. After the paperwork, she sat in her car and stared at the deed. Rain traced thin silver lines down the window, distorting the world outside. The paper trembled in her hands. She wanted to cry, not from fear, not yet, but from the absurdity of hope. $1,000 for a chance to start again. When she arrived at the edge of Ravencourt Hill, the sun had already begun its slow descent. The estate rose from the fog like something half remembered from a dream, vast, elegant, wounded. Iron gates hung open at awkward angles, vines strangling their delicate scrollwork. The air was colder there, as though time itself had stalled. She stepped out of the car, boots crunching against gravel soaked in rain. For a moment she stood motionless, letting the quiet swallow her. Only the distant caw of crows broke the silence. The estate loomed ahead, its tall windows black as mirrors, reflecting nothing back. Claire took a deep breath and walked forward. The path was lined with statues, crumbling figures of kings, queens, and angels, all staring down with blank, eroded faces. Each seemed to watch her pass, judging silently. Her key, a plain brass one issued by the county, felt absurdly small in her hand as she reached the massive oak doors. She pushed, expecting resistance, but they gave way easily, swinging open with a groan that echoed through vast emptiness. Dust greeted her like a wave, the scent of age, of forgotten perfume and mold. Light from the setting sun filtered through cracked stained glass, painting fractured colors across the marble floor. The first thing she noticed was silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence, the kind that seemed to listen back. Her footsteps echoed down a long corridor lined with portraits, faces of men and women she didn't know stared from gilded frames, their eyes painted with the eerie precision of old masters. She lingered on one, a woman in emerald robes, a crown slightly tilted on her head. The plaque beneath had faded, but one word remained, Amara. Claire stepped back, her chest tightening. There was something about the eyes painted centuries ago, yet alive, searching. Lightning flashed outside, throwing shadows across the room. For an instant, the woman's expression seemed to change, her painted lips tightening, her gaze turning toward the doorway, as if warning. Claire blinked. The portrait was still again. She exhaled shakily, forcing a laugh. "You're losing it already," she whispered to herself. She wandered deeper, through hallways thick with decay-torn curtains swaying like ghosts, chandeliers hanging askew, dust motes swirling in shafts of dying light. Every corner whispered of a life once grand, now drowned in silence. In what must have once been a ballroom, she found a cracked grand piano standing alone. She pressed one key. It responded with a dull, ghostly note that lingered too long, like an echo unwilling to fade. Claire smiled faintly. "You just need some love," she murmured, tracing the instrument's edge. Outside, the wind rose. The doors behind her creaked shut, not slammed, but eased closed, as though by unseen hands. She froze, breath shallow. "Ben," she called instinctively, forgetting her son was staying with her sister until she settled in. No answer, only the wind. She turned slowly toward the main hall, her reflection faintly visible in the broken mirror across the room. Behind her reflection, for the briefest second, she saw a flicker of movement, a shape slipping out of view. Her heartbeat quickened. "It's just the light," she whispered. Still, she backed away until she stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by silence and history. Her phone had no signal. The air was colder now, unnaturally so. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the unease, she felt something else. A strange belonging, as if the house had been waiting for her, recognizing her in some unseen way. She walked to the base of the grand staircase, where the marble steps curved upward into darkness. Her hand brushed the rail, and for a moment, warmth pulsed beneath her fingers, faint but real. She pulled her hand back quickly, staring. The railing was just wood and dust, but her heart was racing. Rain began again, tapping gently on the high glass dome above. A whispering sound echoed faintly, almost like voices carried through the wind. She stood there for a long time, listening, and then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the mansion, she heard the soft, distant chime of a music box, slow, haunting, impossibly clear. Her breath caught. The sound drifted through the air like memory, a lullaby from another century. Claire took one hesitant step forward, then another. The palace, for the first time in years, was no longer silent. The music box melody lingered in the air, slow, trembling, like a heartbeat trapped in time. Claire stood motionless at the base of the stairs, every nerve alive with fear and wonder. The sound came from somewhere deep inside the house, weaving through corridors she hadn't yet explored. Each note seemed to echo through her chest, fragile but insistent, leading her forward. She took a step, then another, her boots brushing dust from the marble floor. The grand staircase rose before her like a promise and a warning. She gripped the banister, the same one that had pulsed with warmth moments ago, and began to climb. The second floor was darker, The stained glass windows were thick with grime, barely letting in the silver light of the storm outside. Lightning illuminated the hallway for brief, electric seconds, flashes revealing a series of closed doors, each one carved with a crest she didn't recognize. The music had stopped. The silence returned, heavier now, pressing against her ears. Claire paused, hand hovering over a doorknob. She turned it slowly. The hinges complained with a moan that seemed to stretch forever. Inside, dust blanketed everything, furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts frozen in place. She stepped in, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ashes. A vanity sat by the far wall, its mirror cracked down the center. On its surface lay a silver comb, a string of pearls turned yellow with age, and an old jewelry box. She reached out, brushing away the dust. When she opened it, the lid creaked and the same haunting melody began to play. Her breath hitched. The tiny ballerina inside spun in slow circles, her paint chipped, her dress flaking to dust. The tune was identical, the one she just heard echoing through the hall. Claire closed the lid quickly, but the melody kept playing, faintly now, as if the box itself refused to stop. A cold draft slipped past her neck. She turned sharply. The door behind her had shut. Her heart pounded. "Hello," her voice cracked the silence. "Is someone here?" No answer, only the steady ticking of a wall clock that hadn't worked in years. She moved toward the door, but something caught her eye, a photograph lying half buried on the floor near the bed. She bent down and lifted it gently. It showed a woman, regal, unsmiling, the same face she'd seen in the portrait downstairs. Queen Amara. Beside her stood a young man in military attire, his eyes cold, distant. The corner of the photograph had been burned, the edges curling inward as if someone had tried to erase the memory. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "They must never find the crown." Claire's hands trembled. She slipped the photo into her coat pocket and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The house seemed to breathe with her now, every sound magnified, every shadow alive. The floorboards creaked not just beneath her steps, but behind them too. She turned, scanning the hallway. Nothing, only stillness. Downstairs, thunder rolled. The lights flickered for a heartbeat. The chandeliers glowed faintly before plunging back into darkness. She stumbled toward the main hall, guided only by lightning flashes. Her reflection in the shattered mirror looked pale, frightened, and not entirely hers. For just an instant, another figure seemed to stand behind her, its face hidden in shadow. When she spun around, the space was empty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. No signal, just the clock app flashing midnight. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. Footsteps from the floor above, slow, heavy, pacing. Claire froze beneath the staircase, her pulse thundering in her ears. The sound stopped. She strained to listen, holding her breath. Nothing. Then a whisper, faint, feminine, almost gentle. "Leave while you still can." Her knees weakened. "Who's there?" she called, voice breaking. Only silence answered. Lightning flared again through the broken window panes, illuminating the grand hall, and in that split second of white light, Claire saw it. A single door at the end of the corridor, slightly open, swinging on its hinges though no wind touched it. Drawn by something beyond reason, she moved toward it. The wood groaned beneath her steps, dust spiraling up from the floor. The door led to what looked like an office, tall shelves, a cracked globe, papers long turned to lace by time. On the desk lay a single object untouched by decay. A gold key, small and ornate, glimmering faintly in the darkness. She picked it up, feeling its strange weight. On the handle, engraved letters caught the light, "For the rightful keeper." Before she could think, a loud bang echoed behind her. The door slammed shut, sealing her in. Claire's breath came fast. She tried the handle. It wouldn't move. The key in her hand felt suddenly hot, burning against her skin. She dropped it onto the desk, backing away. Then, from somewhere within the walls, came the low rumble of gears turning ancient, mechanical, as if something in the foundation itself had awakened. The floor vibrated beneath her. Dust rained from the ceiling. The shelves trembled, spilling books and glass. She stumbled toward the window, but before she could reach it, the vibration stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. She turned slowly toward the desk. The key was gone. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the cracked glass of a cabinet nearby. And in that reflection, she saw movement, a woman's silhouette standing behind her, face obscured, crown glinting faintly in the dark. Claire spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. She pressed her back against the cold wall, trembling. "You're imagining this," she whispered, though her voice no longer sounded like her own. When she opened the door again, the house seemed different, alive. The air hummed faintly, every shadow whispering secrets she couldn't understand. She walked down the main hall, clutching the photograph in her pocket like a talisman. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving only mist and moonlight. Through the cracked glass, the palace looked softer now, almost sorrowful. As she reached the door to leave, she noticed a man standing beyond the gate, a silhouette under a flickering street lamp. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Her stomach dropped. She blinked, and he was gone. Only the fog remained, curling around the iron gates like smoke. Claire closed the door slowly, locking it behind her. The sound of the bolt, sliding into place, echoed through the empty halls, final and heavy. She leaned against the door, exhaling shakily. The house was silent once more, but deep within its walls, faint and steady, the music box began to play again. Transition line for continuity. And as the melody drifted through the night, Claire didn't yet know the palace hadn't chosen her by accident. After that haunting night, Claire returned at dawn, the air still heavy with the scent of rain and memory. The mansion stood before her like a sleeping giant, its stone walls glistening with dew, its silence louder than ever. For the first time, she saw it not as a ruin, but as a living thing, breathing, watching, waiting. She stepped through the gates again, this time with purpose. Her boots crunched over gravel softened by the storm. Morning light seeped through torn clouds, painting the estate in shades of silver and pale gold. The vines glistened, their leaves trembling in the wind, as if whispering secrets too old to be spoken aloud. The grand doors opened with a groan that rippled through the air, echoing down the halls like a sigh of remembrance. Inside, the scent of old wood and dust embraced her, the perfume of forgotten years. The silence pressed against her, but beneath it, she could feel something stirring. The house no longer felt empty. Claire paused in the foyer, her eyes tracing the intricate carvings on the columns, angels with broken wings, roses with stone petals cracked by time. Above, the chandelier hung like a skeleton of glass and bronze, the remnants of its former beauty still glinting faintly in the light that streamed through fractured windows. She whispered to herself, "You must have been magnificent once." Her voice drifted through the air, swallowed quickly by the vastness of the hall. She carried a notebook, now a gift from her son, Bennett's first page already filled with sketches and notes. "For your new adventure," he'd said before she left. Claire smiled faintly at the memory. She wanted to show him that this wasn't madness, that maybe this place could become their home. Room by room, she explored, each one a frozen story. The dining hall, its long table warped and bowed, still held tarnished silver, ware laid neatly as though waiting for guests who never came. The ballroom mirrored the memory of laughter. She could almost hear it, faint and fleeting, when the wind brushed the high windows. Everywhere she went, she found signs of faded grandeur. Hand-painted ceilings, velvet drapes turned to powder, murals of kings and queens whose faces had nearly dissolved with age. She ran her fingers over them, tracing the ghosts of color. One mural caught her attention. It stretched across the curved ceiling of the main hall, a painting of light piercing through storm clouds, illuminating a royal crest. The emblem was intricate, a crown above a sword crossed with a lily. She tilted her head back, squinting at it. Ravencourt, she murmured. The name rolled off her tongue like an echo. Something about that crest stirred the same strange pull she'd felt when she first saw the estate's listing. It was as if the symbol itself carried a heartbeat, something ancient and unyielding. She climbed a rickety ladder to get a closer look, the wooden rungs creaking under her weight. Her flashlight beam skimmed the paint's cracked surface. Beneath layers of grime, faint letters emerged, Latin, barely legible. Veritas coronabit. She mouthed the words softly. Truth shall crown. A shiver ran down her spine. Lightning from the morning storm flickered again through the windows, and for a fleeting second, the crest seemed to gleam, the gold leaf catching light it shouldn't have been able to. She blinked. The shimmer was gone. Stepping down, she felt something crunch beneath her boot, a fragment of porcelain, white and delicate. When she bent to pick it up, she realized it was the broken piece of a crown figurine. The tiny edges were scorched. Her heart raced. A fire, she whispered. Someone tried to burn this place. She turned toward the far wall, where blackened marks climbed like the memory of flames. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the faint char of something terrible. The rumors about the fire, about owners disappearing, came rushing back. For the first time, she felt a thread of unease. Still, curiosity overpowered fear. The house wasn't evil. It was wounded, and somewhere deep inside, Claire felt the same. She found herself drawn back toward the ballroom, its grand chandeliers reduced to twisted metal, its mirrors dulled by decades of neglect. Yet, even in ruin, it was breathtaking. The vast ceiling soared high above her, painted with cherubs and constellations, their beauty barely visible through the dust. She stood there in silence, imagining the music that once filled this room, the swirling gowns, the laughter of another century. Her hand brushed across the cracked marble of the piano. She pressed a key again. This time, the note was softer, warmer, almost alive. A flutter of hope rose in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this place could be beautiful again. She began to clean. Not much, just clearing dust from surfaces, opening drapes that hadn't seen light in years. As she worked, the house seemed to shift, the air lightening with every window she opened. She could almost feel it breathing again. Her phone vibrated, a text from Ben. "Did you move in yet? Is it creepy?" She smiled. "Yes, but in a good way." She typed back, "I think it just needs a little love." But as she set the phone down, a faint hum reached her ears, so soft she thought she imagined it. A vibration beneath the floorboards, low and steady, almost like a heartbeat. She crouched down, pressing her palm against the cold marble. "Nothing, only silence, old pipes," she muttered, "or rats." Still, the sound had stopped the moment she acknowledged it. By midday, sunlight flooded through the high windows, scattering dust into golden haze. For the first time since she'd entered the estate, Claire felt warmth. She stood in the center of the ballroom, eyes closed, letting the light touch her face. "This isn't a curse," she whispered to herself. "It's a beginning." Then from above, a faint thud. Her eyes snapped open. Another sound, softer, like footsteps pacing across the ceiling. Her heart skipped. The ballroom ceiling was massive, far above her, unreachable without scaffolding. Yet the sound was clear, deliberate. She moved toward the grand staircase, craning her neck to look up. Dust drifted down like snow from above. She swallowed hard. Hello, no answer. She waited, every muscle tense. The sound came again, closer now, a dragging step, slow and heavy, and then silence. Claire exhaled shakily, gripping the railing. "You're just tired, that's all." She turned away, trying to calm the tremor in her chest. But as she walked back through the hall, the chandelier above her gave a single, sharp creak, a warning sound that made her freeze. One glass pendant, cracked by time, trembled and then fell, shattering on the floor beside her foot. Claire flinched, heart hammering. The house was silent again, too silent, and in that silence the faintest sound returned, not footsteps this time, but a low whisper, carried through the air like a sigh from the walls themselves. She couldn't make out the words, but she could feel their meaning, something between sorrow and welcome. She stepped back slowly, her breath shallow, her pulse thundering. "Okay," she whispered to herself, voice shaking but soft. "If you're still here, I'm listening." The wind outside stirred through the cracked windows, carrying with it a faint trace of music, the same tune from the night before. The house, it seemed, had remembered her. Transition line for continuity, and as the melody drifted once more through the dusty halls, Claire realized the palace was not merely haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by memory itself. By late afternoon, the air inside Ravencourt Palace felt heavier, as though every breath carried a century's worth of dust and memory. The sun dipped lower, its light spilling in narrow ribbons through fractured glass, scattering across the cracked marble floors like liquid gold. Claire wandered through the west wing, the one marked unsafe on the county deed. The floors creaked beneath her boots, but she didn't care. Curiosity outweighed fear now. The place seemed to hum quietly, an invisible current guiding her deeper. She opened a door that stuck halfway before yielding with a groan. The room beyond was long and narrow, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling. The faint smell of burnt paper lingered, mixed with something older, old wood, candle wax, and forgotten perfume. A library. Books still filled the shelves, though most were crumbling, their spines broken, titles erased by time. Some lay scattered across the floor, others stacked neatly as if someone once cared enough to preserve them. She brushed her fingers over one, the leather cracked but soft. When she opened it, pages flaked apart in her hands, releasing a faint whisper of dust. Between two pages, something slipped free, a folded piece of parchment, brittle and yellow. Claire held it up to the light. The handwriting was elegant, ink faded to brown. "To whoever finds this, the palace remembers what men tried to forget. Follow the crest. It leads to the truth they feared." Her pulse quickened. She turned the parchment over. A faint wax seal still clung to one corner, broken but bearing the same crown and lily emblem she'd seen on the ceiling mural. She traced it with her thumb. "Follow the crest." The phrase lingered in her mind as she looked around. The walls here, though dusty, were lined with decorative trim, and there it was, carved faintly into the wood above the fireplace, the same crest, half hidden by soot. Claire crouched, examining it closer. The lily petals had been carved in remarkable detail, too deliberate to be mere decoration. She pressed against the center of the crest, half expecting nothing to happen. A soft click, the sound echoed faintly through the room. She pulled back, startled, watching as a small panel beneath the mantel loosened and fell forward, revealing a hollow compartment inside the wall. Dust poured out like smoke. Inside the cavity lay a single brass handle, ornate, tarnished with age, attached to a mechanism that vanished into darkness. She hesitated, then grasped it firmly and pulled. Something shifted within the wall, gears turning, wood grinding against stone. From the far side of the library, an entire bookshelf began to move, swinging outward with a deep groan. Behind it, a hidden passage. Claire stepped back, stunned. The passage was narrow, its interior lined with stone and cobwebs. A faint draught brushed her face, carrying the scent of damp earth. She grabbed her flashlight and shone it inside. The beam revealed steps leading downward into blackness. Her throat tightened. "What were you hiding?" she whispered. For a long moment she stood there, heart thudding, caught between fear and fascination. Then she began to descend. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The air grew colder, the silence denser. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, echoing like a slow metronome. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber, its walls carved from stone, slick with moisture. In the center stood a pedestal, covered in dust and spiderwebs. On it rested a large, leather-bound book. She approached slowly, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The cover bore the royal crest, once again the same crown and lily, embossed in gold, that had somehow survived the years. Claire brushed her fingers across it. The leather was cold. When she opened it, the pages crackled like dry leaves. It wasn't a ledger, it was a diary. The handwriting inside was delicate, flowing, but hurried as if written in fear. The first page read, "By order of the crown, these words must remain hidden. The kingdom fell not from invasion, but from betrayal within its own blood. And when fire consumed Ravencourt, so too did it consume the truth." She read on, her voice trembling. "If the heir returns, the palace will awaken, and when the crest gleams once more, the rightful keeper shall reclaim what was lost." Claire's hand shook as she traced the ink. The entries were signed only with an initial, A. The Queen's name Amara. Her stomach twisted. "This can't be real," she whispered. A faint breeze stirred the pages, though no wind should have reached this deep underground. The candle holder beside the pedestal rattled, metal clinking softly. Then a sound, footsteps. Claire's head snapped up, her flashlight darting toward the passage. The light caught movement, a shadow crossing the top of the stairs. "Hello?" Her voice echoed, small and uncertain. No answer, only the creak of retreating steps, followed by silence. She waited, holding her breath. Nothing. The sound faded completely. She closed the diary carefully, clutching it to her chest, and climbed back up the stairs, her heartbeat loud in her ears. When she emerged into the library again, the air felt different, charged, as though the house itself knew what she had found. Outside, the last light of the day stretched long across the floors, painting the walls in amber and shadow. Dust swirled in slow motion through the beams. She looked around the library once more at the shelves, the hidden compartment, the seal still glowing faintly from where her fingers had pressed. "Follow the crest," she whispered again. Her eyes drifted upward toward the ceiling, where a carved crown adorned the arch above the doorway, and, faintly visible now in the dying light, a pattern etched into the stone that spread across the walls like veins. It wasn't just decoration, it was a map. Her pulse raced. The lines connected every emblem in the palace, each one pointing, she realized, toward the same place, the great hall ceiling. She stepped back, the truth dawning slowly. The ceiling she had admired that morning, the one with the mural of light and storm, wasn't just art. It was a clue. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling the palace hum around her again, soft, patient, waiting. Somewhere above, something creaked, faint, deliberate, almost like acknowledgement. Claire opened her eyes, a faint smile crossing her lips despite the fear tightening in her chest. "You wanted to be found," she said softly. The air seemed to stir in response, as if the house itself exhaled. And just as she turned to leave the library, a gust of cold air rushed past her, slamming the hidden shelf closed behind her with a thunderous finality. The echo rippled through the halls, up the staircases, across the ballroom ceiling, and far above, faintly, dust fell from a single loose tile. Transition line for continuity. That night, as the wind howled through broken windows, Claire couldn't sleep because somewhere above her, the palace was whispering again. That night, sleep refused to come. Claire lay on the faded couch in what used to be the parlor, her flashlight flickering on the low ceiling above. Every gust of wind made the window frames sigh, and every distant creak felt too deliberate to be dismissed as settling wood. The diary rested on the table beside her, its leather cover still faintly warm, as if the ink within it remembered the hand that wrote it. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside Ravencourt Palace, the air still carried a strange vibration, a pulse that seemed to hum beneath the marble floors. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was more like awareness. Claire turned over, pulling the blanket tighter. Her eyes fell on the photograph she'd found days ago, Queen Amara standing beside the young officer, the warning scrawled on the back, "They must never find the crown." She whispered into the darkness, "What crown, Amara?" The house didn't answer, but the silence felt heavier now, as if it had heard her and was deciding whether to respond. When dawn came, pale and reluctant, she rose and moved through the hall. The world outside glimmered with frost. The estate's gardens shimmered like glass. Inside, a thin veil of light cut through the gloom, touching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. Claire returned to the great hall, to the ceiling that had haunted her thoughts all night. The mural of storm and light spread above her like the sky itself. She could see it now, the same crest, woven subtly into the clouds, hidden in the brushstrokes. She dragged a ladder across the floor, it shrieked against the marble, and began to climb, one careful step at a time. Her fingers brushed the surface of the painting, rough and cold beneath the grime. As she wiped at the dust, faint lines emerged, markings she hadn't seen before. Circles, symbols, letters. They weren't part of the artwork. They'd been carved into the plaster beneath it. Her heart raced. Someone had hidden something up here, something no restoration could reveal. She climbed higher, steadying herself on a beam. The ceiling was high, the distance dizzying, but she couldn't stop now. She traced the carving with her fingertip. It formed a sequence, numbers maybe, or coordinates. She pulled her phone from her pocket, snapping a photo before losing her balance slightly. The ladder groaned beneath her weight. A gust of wind rushed through the hall, though no door or window was open. Claire froze, gripping the rung. Then, faintly, a sound, a whisper, soft as breath. It came from somewhere above the ceiling. She tilted her head, listening. The whisper wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like words caught between walls. She swallowed hard. "Who's there?" No reply, only the echo of her voice bouncing off marble and stone. Then another sound, a creak from directly overhead. Something moved inside the ceiling, slow, deliberate, dragging. Her pulse quickened. She climbed down, the wood trembling beneath her. When her boots hit the floor, the sound stopped. She stepped back, staring up at the ceiling where the marks had been. Dust drifted down like ash, forming thin lines along the floor. The palace was trying to tell her something. Claire walked toward the doorway, turning back once to look again at the ceiling. From a certain angle, in the morning light, the carving seemed to glow, the crest shining faintly like a hidden constellation. She whispered, "Follow the crest." Her words seemed to unlock something. The chandelier above her gave a sudden metallic groan, swaying slightly on its chain. A single crystal detached, spinning as it fell, catching sunlight before shattering on the marble with a sound sharp as glass laughter. Claire flinched but didn't run. She couldn't. The fear had changed shape. It no longer paralyzed her. It fascinated her. She went to the west corridor again, the one leading back to the library, hoping for answers. The air there was colder. A thin mist hung in the corners, almost invisible but present enough to make her breath visible. As she approached the library door, she noticed something strange, the faint outline of footprints in the dust. Not hers, these were larger, spaced wider apart, as if belonging to a man. She knelt, touching the prints. They were fresh. Her breath caught. Slowly, she followed them through the library, past the shelf that hid the secret chamber. The footprints stopped at the center of the room and vanished. No retreating steps, no direction, just gone. Claire's heartbeat drummed in her ears. "Ben," she whispered instinctively, though she knew her son was miles away. Silence. Her flashlight beam caught something glinting on the floor, a small piece of glass, curved like a lens. She picked it up carefully, wiping away the dust. It wasn't glass, it was crystal, the same kind as the chandeliers. She turned slowly, looking up. The library ceiling had no chandelier. Then where had it come from? Her gaze fell back to the secret panel. It was slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. Her stomach tightened. She stepped forward, pushing it open. The mechanism groaned like a sigh. Inside, the brass handle she had pulled before gleamed faintly, though no light touched it. "Someone's been here," she whispered. Her voice echoed down the hidden passage, disappearing into the dark. She turned off the flashlight for just a moment, letting her eyes adjust, and froze. A faint glow pulsed from deep within the tunnel. Soft golden, slow like breathing. Her throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something stronger, the same force that had brought her here, pulled her forward. She stepped inside. The air was damp and cold, but the glow grew brighter with each step. It wasn't firelight. It was softer, alive somehow, illuminating the stone walls in shades of amber. Then, just as she rounded the final curve, the light vanished. Darkness swallowed her whole. Her breath came quick and shallow. She lifted the flashlight, flicking it on again. The beam fell across the pedestal where the diary had rested. Only now the diary was gone. Claire's stomach twisted. No. She ran her hands across the pedestal, across the floor, across the walls. Nothing. The diary had been taken. Panic welled up inside her. Someone else knew about this place. Someone else had been here. She turned and ran back toward the library, her footsteps echoing through the tunnel. When she emerged, the room was colder still. The windows rattled as if touched by invisible hands. The chandelier crystal she'd found earlier was gone. Her breathing quickened. Then, in the silence, the faintest sound drifted through the air, the soft, distant opening of a door. Claire spun around. Who's there? Nothing. Only the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall, slow, deliberate, echoing off stone and emptiness. She ran after them, turning corners, calling out, but the halls were endless, and the echoes played tricks on her ears. When she finally stopped, breathless, she found herself standing once again in the great hall. The ladder still stood beneath the mural, but the symbols she'd uncovered were gone, the ceiling smooth, unmarked, as though no carvings had ever been there. Her hands shook. No, I saw them. The house, it seemed, had taken its secret back, transition line for continuity, and as the last echo of footsteps faded, Claire realized she wasn't the only one the palace had decided to awaken. Claire didn't move for a long time. The air in the great hall felt different now, charged, thick, alive. The murals above her had returned to stillness, the painted storm forever frozen in mid-swirl, but she knew what she'd seen. The carvings were real. The footprints were real. The diary, gone. Something or someone had been inside the palace with her. Her hands trembled as she sank onto the bottom stair, her breath fogging the cold air. The marble beneath her palms was slick with condensation, and beneath that cool surface she could still feel that faint, thrumming vibration, like a pulse buried in stone. The palace was awake. Outside, dusk was falling fast. The last fragments of sunlight stretched across the windows, turning the dust into tiny sparks of gold. For a fleeting moment, the place looked beautiful again, and Claire felt a pang of sadness. The sadness of something once loved, now forgotten. But that beauty dissolved as quickly as it came. The light faded, leaving the house cloaked in blue-gray shadows. Claire stood and forced herself to move. She couldn't stay still. Fear was like quicksand. It deepened when you didn't move. She made her way toward the kitchen, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The kitchen was large, lined with rusted stoves and long, forgotten utensils. Broken plates littered the counters, their edges dulled by years of dust. In the far corner, she saw a door half hidden behind collapsed shelves. It looked newer. She cleared the debris away, revealing a thick iron door with a handle shaped like a serpent. When she pulled, it groaned in protest before swinging open to reveal a narrow stairway spiraling downward. Her pulse quickened. Another passage. She aimed her light into the darkness. Stone steps disappeared into shadow, the air below cooler, heavier. The smell of damp stone and something faintly metallic, iron, maybe blood, rose up to meet her. She hesitated only a moment before descending. Each step echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the vastness below. The further she went, the colder it became, until her breath came out in visible wisps. At the bottom, she found herself standing in a low tunnel, supported by wooden beams blackened with age. The walls glistened faintly where water had seeped through. It looked like an old servant passage, one of those secret corridors that connected different wings of grand estates. She swept her flashlight slowly across the walls, then stopped. There, etched into the damp stone, was the same royal crest, the crown above the sword and lily. Beneath it, faint words had been carved into the wall. Here lies truth unburied. Claire's throat tightened. She reached out to touch the inscription, her fingers tracing the grooves. The stone felt oddly warm. Suddenly, the beam of her flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed her. Her breath caught. She tapped the flashlight, shook it, but it refused to turn back on. The silence pressed against her from all sides, heavy and absolute. Then, faintly, a sound, a soft scrape, like something, or someone, moving along the wall. "Hello," she whispered. Her voice barely rose above her breath. The scraping stopped. Claire swallowed hard, forcing calm. She turned toward where she thought the stairs were, her hand outstretched. But instead of stone, her fingers met fabric, rough and cold. She froze. A whisper touched her ear. "You shouldn't have come here." She gasped, stumbling backward. Her heel struck the step, and she fell hard, her flashlight clattering against the ground and flickering back to life. The tunnel was empty. Her heart raced so violently it hurt. No, no. The light trembled in her hands as she scanned the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Nothing, just stone, dripping water, and dust. Then the beam caught something glinting near the base of the far wall. She crawled closer. It was a small pendant, tarnished and cracked, half buried in the dirt. She picked it up carefully and wiped it clean. The same crest, crown, sword, lily, but on the back an engraving, "To Amara from Elias." Claire's pulse skipped. Elias, the officer from the photograph. She turned it over again, and a small latch clicked. Inside the pendant was a faded miniature painting. Amara's face, painted in perfect detail, her eyes sad, her lips parted as if caught mid-confession. Lightning flashed through the cracks above, briefly illuminating the tunnel. For that instant, Claire thought she saw movement again, this time at the far end of the passage, near the curve that vanished into darkness. A figure, still and tall, standing just beyond the reach of her light. She blinked, gone. Her fear began to twist into something else, an understanding that she was following the trail of something immense. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a history unraveling itself for her, piece by piece. She pocketed the pendant and climbed the stairs quickly, emerging back into the kitchen. Her hands shook as she pushed the iron door shut behind her. When she turned around, something made her freeze. Footprints, wet footprints, leading from the kitchen doorway toward the main hall. Large, heavy prints, still glistening as if whoever made them had just walked through water. Claire's breath hitched. She followed them slowly, her steps careful, silent. The footprints led straight to the center of the great hall and stopped at the base of the staircase. Above, on the landing, the chandelier swayed. Just slightly, her voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The air responded with a faint exhale, soft, sad, almost human. Then, as she watched, something pale began to form on the staircase, a shimmer in the air, like mist condensing into shape. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't nothing. For a moment she saw her clearly, a woman, tall, elegant, draped in the faint outline of royal garments. Her crown was crooked, her eyes hollow but kind. Queen Amara. Their gazes met, and a cold ache passed through Claire's chest. Amara raised one translucent hand, pointing toward the ceiling. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, the vision fractured, breaking apart like dust caught in a sudden gust. Claire staggered back, gripping the railing to keep from falling. Her skin tingled with static, her breath shallow. The air smelled faintly of lilies and smoke. When she finally looked up again, the ceiling above had changed. The mural of storm and crown shimmered faintly in the light of a flickering flashlight, and there at the center of the painted crest was a single hairline crack that hadn't been there before. From it, a thin stream of dust drifted down, catching the air like falling ash. The palace had revealed its next secret. Claire stood there in stunned silence, her fear slowly giving way to awe. The ceiling wasn't just hiding a message, it was hiding something inside. She looked down at the pendant still clenched in her hand, whispering to herself, "Truth unburied." The words from the wall echoed in her mind as she turned toward the staircase, her heart pounding. She didn't notice that behind her, on the marble floor, the wet footprints began to fade, one by one, until there was no trace that anyone else had been there at all. Only silence remained, transition line for continuity. As the last specks of dust drifted from the ceiling, Claire understood. The palace wasn't finished speaking. It had only just begun to tell its story. Morning crept into Ravencourt Palace like a hesitant guest. Pale light slipped through the cracked windows, touching the marble floors where dust still lingered like ghostly fog. Claire hadn't slept. She had sat through the night in a half-trance, staring at the hairline crack in the ceiling, the one that hadn't existed before the Queen's apparition appeared. The house was silent again, but not dead. It was the silence of something that watched, something waiting. Every creak and distant sigh seemed deliberate now, every sound a whisper meant for her alone. By dawn, she had made a decision. She wasn't leaving. Not until she understood what the palace was trying to show her. She brewed coffee in a dented old pot she'd found in the kitchen, the smell of it rising through the stale air like a memory of warmth. She sipped it slowly, her reflection wavering in the cracked porcelain of her cup. On the table beside her lay the pendant, the photograph, and her notebook. The words "Truth Unburied" were scrawled across the top of the latest page in her hurried handwriting. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaustion in every motion. "If you wanted me to find something, Amara, show me how." The ceiling crack seemed to mock her from above, too far to reach, too dangerous to climb. But there had to be another clue, something she'd missed. She wandered through the corridors again, her footsteps soft and careful. The morning light revealed more details she hadn't noticed before. Faint impressions in the wallpaper where paintings once hung. Grooves on the floor where heavy furniture had been dragged away long ago. Every room was like a page torn from a book half, burned fragments of stories without endings. When she entered the ballroom again, the air felt strangely charged. Dust hung in stillness, unshaken. Across the far wall, the large cracked mirror one she hadn't approached since her first night seemed to shimmer faintly in the new light. Claire stopped. Something in its reflection wasn't right. The mirror's surface was warped with age, But beyond the distortion, the room's reflection looked different. In the glass, the chandelier above her hung perfectly whole, glowing with light. The murals on the ceiling were restored, vivid and golden. For an instant, she wasn't looking at ruin at all. She was seeing the ballroom as it once was. Her breath caught. No. She stepped closer. The reflection shifted again, not breaking, but changing. And there, behind her own reflection, a faint shape moved. A woman, tall, poised, wearing a gown the color of twilight. Queen Amara. Claire's heart thundered. She turned nothing, empty air. When she looked back at the mirror, the reflection was no longer hers. It showed Amara standing before the ballroom fireplace, holding what looked like a rolled parchment. The queen's lips moved, whispering something Claire couldn't hear. Then she turned and pressed her hand against the glass, and the image rippled like water. Claire's own reflection returned, startled, pale. She reached out instinctively, pressing her palm where Amara's had been. The glass was cold, but beneath the chill, she felt a pulse, a faint vibration. And then something extraordinary happened. The mirror clouded from within, the silvering shifting like smoke. Words began to form beneath the glass, scratched in thin lines of frost. Seek the map. It lies where truth and reflection meet. Claire stepped back, heart pounding. The words lingered for only seconds before melting away, leaving the mirror blank again. Her pulse quickened as she grabbed her notebook, scribbling the message down before it vanished completely. Truth and reflection. She murmured, "What does that mean?" She looked around the ballroom at the mirrors lining the walls, each cracked, dull, or darkened. Reflection. The house was filled with them. She ran her fingers over the cracked glass, feeling the uneven edges. The center panel, the one that had shown her Amara, was loose. When she pushed gently, it gave slightly under her touch, as though something behind it resisted. Heart racing, Claire searched for leverage. She found an old iron candlestick nearby and wedged it carefully into the frame. The mirror protested with a groan before snapping free from the wall, revealing a hollow space behind it. Dust billowed out, catching in her throat. Inside, folded and brittle with age, was a large piece of parchment. Her hands shook as she drew it out and spread it across the piano under the slanted beam of light. It was a blueprint, the entire layout of Ravencourt Palace. But this was no ordinary architectural plan. Handwritten notes filled the margins in elegant script, the same she'd seen in the diary. Symbols marked specific rooms, a flame drawn near the east wing, a crown at the main hall, a dagger over the west staircase. And at the very center, drawn over the great hall ceiling, a single emblem stood out, the royal crest. Claire traced it with her fingertip. That's where it's hidden. Beneath the drawing, a short note had been scrawled in faded ink. Only those who see truth in reflection shall find what the kingdom buried. Claire exhaled shakily, her mind racing. The carvings, the whispers, the mirrors, they were all part of a design. A message woven through time. She ran her fingers over the parchment again, noticing something strange. The edges of the paper were darker, burnt slightly, but the burn marks were uneven, curling toward one particular corner. She turned the map toward the light, and there it was, faint, nearly invisible until the sunlight hit it at just the right angle. A secondary layer of writing, invisible ink, now half-exposed by age. She tilted the paper, and the words revealed themselves slowly, like ghosts surfacing through fog, guarded by silence, found in light. Claire's skin prickled. A shiver of recognition ran through her. The ceiling mural light breaking through the storm, found in light. It wasn't just symbolic, it was literal. She looked up, her eyes tracing the high windows where morning sunlight now poured in, scattering across the dust-filled air. The light shifted across the map's drawings, landing briefly on one corner marked with the crown symbol, the same area of the ceiling where the hairline crack had appeared. The palace was showing her the path. She folded the map carefully, her heart thundering in her chest. "You hid everything in plain sight, didn't you?" she whispered. The air stirred in response, a soft exhale through the open doorway, carrying the faintest trace of roses and smoke. Claire turned sharply, half expecting the Queen's shadow again, but the hall was empty, and yet, as she stared at the cracked mirror still leaning against the wall, her own reflection wavered. For a brief moment, she didn't see herself at all. She saw a young servant boy in old clothing, carrying a lantern, whispering something she couldn't hear. Then he turned toward her, his lips forming a single word. She leaned closer, breath catching. "What did you say?" The reflection mouthed it again, above. Then the image shattered back to her own reflection, the room silent once more. Claire stood still for a moment, heart pounding, before whispering, "Then above it is." She folded the blueprint under her arm and turned toward the staircase. The palace groaned softly, its timbers shifting like an old creature stirring from sleep. As she ascended toward the upper floors, dust drifted from the rafters, and the echo of her footsteps merged with something faint and distant, a rhythm like a heartbeat pulsing through the walls. The house, it seemed, was breathing again. Transition line for continuity. As the light dimmed behind her, Claire felt the palace watching, as if it already knew she was getting closer to what it had hidden for so long. The upper floors of Ravencourt Palace greeted Claire like a cathedral of dust and silence. Her footsteps echoed along the cracked tiles as she climbed, the blueprint clutched tightly in her hand. The light from below followed her only halfway before fading, swallowed by shadow. She reached the landing where the ceiling arched high above the same place where the hairline crack had appeared the night before. The great mural stretched across it still, depicting storm clouds breaking open to reveal a single crown floating in a ray of sunlight. "Found in light," she whispered to herself. Claire unfolded the blueprint again. Her flashlight trembled as she compared the map's markings to the layout around her. The symbol of the crown sat directly above this spot. Whatever was hidden, it had been sealed inside the ceiling. She looked up. The distance between the floor and the mural was too great to reach by ladder alone. She needed height, something stable. Her eyes scanned the hall until they landed on an old scaffolding structure collapsed in one corner, half buried under dust. She dragged the wooden pieces out, setting them up carefully, testing every joint. The air around her seemed to thrum faintly as she worked, a low vibration beneath the sound of shifting wood. Each creak of the scaffolding echoed strangely, as though the house itself was listening. When it was stable enough, she climbed. With every step upward, the air grew colder. She could see details now she'd missed before, faint brushstrokes. Layers of paint that told a story even more vivid than the rest of the house. Lightning forked across the mural sky, angels reaching upward, hands outstretched toward a single beam of gold. She pressed her palm against the cracked plaster near the crown. Beneath the surface, the texture changed hollow. Her breath caught. Using the edge of a metal scraper from her tool bag, she began to chip gently at the flaking paint. The dust rained down in silver plumes, each strike revealing more of what lay beneath. After a few minutes, the blade struck metal. Claire froze. She scraped carefully until the object emerged, a small panel embedded into the ceiling itself, sealed with a metal latch shaped like the royal crest. Her hands shook as she touched it. The latch was cold but not rusted, as though it had been preserved from time itself. "Found in light," she whispered again. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouded glass above, landing directly on the crest. For a moment the metal glowed faintly, and with a soft click the latch released. Claire gasped, The panel shifted slightly, opening an inch. She reached up, pulling it down. It came loose with a puff of ancient dust, revealing a small hollow chamber. Inside, wrapped in decaying silk, lay a leather-bound book and something that shimmered faintly beneath it. She lowered both items gently to the floor below before climbing down, her heart hammering. The light shifted across the marble as she knelt beside the book, brushing away the dust. The cover bore a familiar emblem, the crown and lily, the same signature she'd seen on every clue so far. She opened it carefully. The ink had faded almost to nothing, but the handwriting was identical to that of the diary she'd lost. The same sweeping lines, the same urgency. "If you are reading this," the first page began, "then the truth I tried to preserve has survived the fire that consumed us all." Claire's pulse quickened. She turned the page. The crown of Ravencourt was never a symbol of wealth. It was a covenant, betrayed, hidden, buried beneath the marble of greed. When the palace burns again, let the pure of heart reclaim it, not for gold, but for light. Her eyes blurred with emotion. These weren't the words of a ruler guarding treasure. They were the plea of a woman who'd watched her world crumble. The faint glimmer beneath the book caught her attention. She lifted the silk cloth fully and gasped. A golden pendant identical to the one she'd found in the tunnel rested beneath. But this one was whole, polished, untouched by time. Its center held a small shard of crystal, faintly glowing from within. Claire held it to the light. The glow grew stronger, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. It cast golden reflections along the floor, scattering patterns of light that danced across the walls. The house seemed to react. The air grew warmer, the distant hum deepened, and faintly, very faintly, the sound of soft music drifted through the hall. The same melody from the music box. Claire's voice trembled as she whispered, "Amara, what did you leave behind?" She turned another page in the journal. The next lines made her freeze. "They sought to silence me, but I hid what they feared. Beneath the stone that hears all things, the crown still waits, and when the palace breathes again, so shall her truth." Claire pressed her hand over the page, her heart racing. Beneath the stone that hears all things. Her eyes darted to the marble floors beneath her feet, the great hall. It wasn't just the ceiling that hid secrets, it was the ground itself. She knelt, tracing the veins in the marble. The patterns swirled in intricate designs, meeting at the center of the hall, where light from the dome above now poured in. The glow from the pendant's crystal reflected there perfectly, marking the same spot the Queen's spirit had once stood. Claire stood, her pulse roaring in her ears. "It's under here." Her voice echoed, swallowed by the cavernous hall. She placed the pendant in the beam of sunlight. The crystal shimmered, its glow brightening until a sharp glint cut across the floor. Then, as the light shifted, something unbelievable happened. One of the marble tiles flickered faintly, revealing the faint outline of a hidden seam. Claire gasped. "You marked it with light." She crouched again, running her fingers along the seam. It was nearly invisible, a perfect illusion of smooth stone. She found a tiny indentation near one corner, just large enough to fit the pendant's edge. The moment she pressed it in, a soft click echoed through the floor. The seam widened slightly, releasing a whisper of air and a faint scent of age and earth. Beneath it, darkness waited, a hidden compartment. Claire sat back on her heels, staring at it in awe. The air seemed alive now, charged with invisible electricity. The palace was no longer whispering, it was breathing. She reached down, slowly lifting the tile. Beneath it lay another cavity lined with velvet long decayed. Inside rested a small iron box, sealed with the royal crest and secured by an intricate lock. Claire traced its edges. The metal was cool and heavy, humming faintly against her fingertips. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You've been waiting for someone to open you." She looked toward the staircase, half expecting a shadow to move, but there was only stillness. Then in that stillness she felt something behind her, a shift in air pressure, the sensation of presence. She turned. At the far end of the hall, the tall double doors were open. The wind moved through them softly, but beyond the light of the entrance, something darker stirred, a figure, motionless, watching. Claire's breath caught. Who's there? No answer. The shadow didn't move. Then, just as the pendant's glow flickered, the doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash that echoed through the entire palace. The sound rolled like thunder, shaking dust from the rafters and scattering her papers across the floor. When the echoes faded, the hall was silent again, utterly still. Claire stood frozen, heart hammering, staring at the closed doors. Her hands trembled as she looked back toward the box, its crest glinting faintly in the dying light. The palace had shown her where to look, but now it felt as if something else had woken, something that did not want her to open it. Transition line for continuity. As the last echo of the slammed doors faded, Claire knew the palace was done showing her clues from this point on. It would begin testing her. The night after the doors slammed shut, silence returned to Ravencourt, but it wasn't the same silence Claire had grown used to. This one watched. It followed her every move, breathing with her, waiting for something. Even the air felt charged, as though the very walls were holding their breath. She sat at the base of the grand staircase, staring at the iron box she'd uncovered from beneath the marble tile. It sat on the floor like a heart pulled from the chest of the palace, still, heavy, humming faintly with secrets. She'd tried to open it, of course. The keyhole was ancient, shaped like a twisted lily, but no ordinary key fit. The pendant she'd found earlier seemed designed for it, yet when she pressed it in, the mechanism wouldn't turn. It was as if the box was waiting, not for a tool, but for a moment. Claire leaned back against the stair, exhaustion dragging at her body. Shadows rippled along the walls as the moonlight shifted through the fractured windows. Every so often, she thought she heard a soft, rhythmic sound, something like the distant creak of wood, but slower, more deliberate. Then, faintly, the whispering began again. It came not from the walls this time, but from above, soft, breathy, rising and falling in gentle waves, the same place where the mural stretched across the ceiling. Claire stood, her flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. "You want me to go up there again?" she whispered. The house didn't answer, but the whispers grew louder, like wind caught in hidden passages. She climbed the scaffolding again, the old wood creaking beneath her feet. Her flashlight beam flickered across the painted storm clouds above, tracing the jagged lines of lightning that seemed almost to move in the dim light. The ceiling was alive. She could feel its faint vibrations rippling beneath the plaster, like something trapped between the surface and the sky. When she reached the top, she noticed the same metal latch she had opened before, but now, just above it, the plaster had begun to crumble. Small cracks spread like veins, trailing outward in delicate lines. She reached out, brushing her fingers across them. The whispers stopped. Then, a faint hum, low, resonant, almost like music. Claire leaned closer, her ear inches from the ceiling. The hum deepened into something more rhythmic, mechanical. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it until a small vibration passed through the beam she stood on. She steadied herself. "What are you trying to show me?" Her words echoed softly in the hollow space. And then, with a slow groan, the plaster began to shift. The ceiling moved. Claire stumbled back, gripping the railing of the scaffold as the mural above her rippled, a fine dust raining down. It wasn't collapsing, it was breathing. The storm clouds, painted in oil, seemed to roll across the ceiling, as if animated from beneath. She could see the faint outline of something metallic behind the paint, something long and rectangular, a hidden compartment larger than the one before. She scrambled down and ran to fetch her crowbar and hammer, dragging them back up the scaffolding. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her heart a drumbeat in her ears. She began to chip carefully at the cracked plaster, each tap sending flakes fluttering like ash. The mural peeled away to reveal a section of aged wood beneath charred at the edges, sealed with old brass fittings. Claire hesitated, running her hand over it. The wood was cool, but faintly warm in patches, as though something beneath it still held heat. With a deep breath, she wedged the crowbar into the seam and pushed. The panel resisted, groaning, then gave way with a sudden pop. A gust of stale air poured out, thick, earthy, tinged with the scent of smoke and age. Inside, half buried in dust and cobwebs, was a chest, smaller than the one she'd imagined but ornate, gilded with gold leaf and sealed with the same crest she'd seen on every clue so far. Her breath hitched. Oh my God! She leaned in, brushing away the debris. The chest's hinges were tarnished but intact. In the center, a single metal clasp held it shut and inlaid within it. Glowing faintly under her flashlight's beam was a fragment of crystal identical to the one in her pendant. Her hand trembled as she lifted the pendant from around her neck. The crystal inside it pulsed faintly, as though sensing its twin. She brought it closer. The moment the two shards aligned, a spark of light flashed between them, bright, sharp, and silent. The clasp released, the lid creaked open, and for a moment Claire couldn't breathe. Inside lay velvet, or what remained of it, and beneath that, the impossible glimmer of jewels. Gold chains, ruby brooches, sapphire pendants, and pearls still luminous despite the centuries. It wasn't just treasure, it was a royal archive of beauty. Her eyes filled with tears. "You really were here," she whispered, thinking of Queen Amara. But as the light played across the gems, something else caught her attention, a small, leather-bound book nestled at the bottom of the chest. Not a diary, not a ledger, it was older, bound in cracked crimson leather, the crest pressed deep into its cover. She reached for it, lifting it gently into the light. The first page was blank, but on the second, scrawled in faded ink, were words that chilled her blood. "If you are reading this, then you are too late. The crown was never meant to be found." Her stomach dropped. She flipped the page. The jewels are cursed not by magic, but by blood. They belonged to those who betrayed, not those who ruled. The queen hid them not to preserve wealth, but to bury sin. Claire felt her knees weaken. Her flashlight flickered as if reacting to the words themselves. She whispered, "No, this can't be," but deep down she knew it was true. The diary she'd read before, the map, the pendant all pointed her toward this moment. And now, standing beneath the painted storm, she realized that Queen Amara hadn't hidden treasure. She'd buried the truth of betrayal, the very thing that destroyed her kingdom. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the glass dome above. Dust rained down in fine sheets, coating her hair, her hands, her trembling breath. The palace groaned in protest, as if awakening from a nightmare. Claire looked back at the chest, its contents glittering under the flickering light, radiant and wrong. A faint whisper drifted through the air again, softer than before, more human this time. A woman's voice, fragile, mournful. "Do not take what was taken from me." Claire's flashlight sputtered out completely. She was plunged into darkness. Her breath came quick and shallow. The voice came again, closer now. "Restore it, or it will claim you too." The air turned icy. Claire reached blindly for the pendant at her neck, clutching it as though it could protect her. The crystal pulsed once, then dimmed. In the blackness, the whispering stopped, and for the first time, the palace was completely silent. Transition line for continuity. When the lights returned, the jewels still glimmered untouched, accusing and very much alive. Claire knew then, the true secret of Ravencourt wasn't what was hidden, but what had been condemned to stay buried. The storm had rolled in from nowhere. Rain hammered the broken windows, wind howling through the gaps like an ancient choir. The chandelier above her swayed violently, scattering shards of faint light across the hall as Claire stood frozen beneath the open ceiling, the chest of jewels gleaming at her feet. She couldn't move, could barely breathe. The Queen's whisper still echoed through her head, "Restore it, or it will claim you too." Lightning flashed. For a fraction of a second, the jewels blazed like living fire. Then darkness again. Claire crouched, her trembling fingers brushing the stones. They were warm, too warm. A deep hum pulsed through them, faint but steady, like a heartbeat under glass. Her reflection shimmered in one of the larger gems. Her own eyes stared back at her, but for a moment they weren't hers. They were the Queen's. She stumbled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. No, no, no. The storm outside grew wilder, the windows rattling in their frames. The ceiling above seemed to groan, alive with the pressure of thunder, and something else, something internal, resonating from deep within the palace itself. Claire's gaze drifted toward the crimson book she'd found inside the chest. The words still burned in her mind. The crown was never meant to be found. She flipped through its pages again, the ink faint and fragmented, but readable in flashes when lightning illuminated the room. The next entry struck her like a blade. We were betrayed by our own. The council conspired against the throne. They took the jewels, symbols of divine right, and used them for blood. Their greed cursed this house. I sealed them in darkness, that no innocent would ever touch them again. Her hands trembled. Amara hadn't hidden treasure, she had imprisoned it. Claire's chest tightened. The jewels weren't hers to claim, they weren't anyone's. The storm cracked open the sky again, thunder rolling like war drums. Dust cascaded from the rafters. She slammed the book shut and clutched it to her chest. The whisper returned, closer now, threading through the air like a sigh. "Do not repeat my sin." Claire's breath hitched. "Amara." A gust of wind answered her, knocking the pendant against her collarbone. The crystal within flickered faintly, casting shifting gold across the walls. In its reflection, she saw movement, a woman's silhouette stepping through the edge of shadow, her form dissolving and reforming with every pulse of lightning. Queen Amara. She stood at the far end of the hall, her eyes sorrowful, her voice layered with centuries of pain. "You opened the wound." Claire shook her head, whispering through her fear, "I didn't know. I thought it was just history. I wanted to understand." The Queen's expression softened, but her tone carried grief that cut through air like frost. "The truth was my burden. It will be yours now." Claire took a step forward. "Then tell me what to do." The Queen raised a translucent hand, pointing toward the ceiling, toward the space she had uncovered. "The crown must stay where light cannot reach. Bury what was taken. Protect the living from the dead." The lightning flared again, blinding her for a heartbeat, and when her vision cleared, the apparition was gone. Only the storm remained. Claire stood there in silence, soaked in moonlight and dread. The jewels in the chest no longer gleamed. Their brilliance had dulled. Their color deepened into something darker, heavier, like blood drying on metal. She touched one. It felt ice cold now. Then came another sound, a faint thud somewhere beyond the hall. She turned sharply, footsteps, slow, deliberate. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked through the storm's roar. No answer. She grabbed her flashlight and moved cautiously toward the corridor. The beam sliced through the darkness, catching glints of movement in the dust, but no figure. The air was thick with tension, heavy with unseen eyes. Then a shadow moved across the far wall, all unmistakable. Her pulse spiked. She backed away, her heart hammering, until she felt the edge of the chest behind her legs. "Show yourself." The answer came not in words but in sound. A door slammed somewhere upstairs, followed by a sharp crash, glass shattering, wood splintering. Claire bolted toward the staircase. The storm's light flashed across the walls, illuminating portraits whose painted faces seemed to twist in agony. Her own shadow leapt ahead of her like a second self racing through the gloom. She reached the landing where the ceiling compartment had opened. The panel above was swaying slightly, as if tugged from within. A chill crawled up her spine. When she climbed back onto the scaffold and shone her light inside, she froze. The chest was moving, not sliding, not shifting, breathing. The jewels inside pulsed faintly, their glow returning, brighter now, synchronized with the rhythm of the thunder outside. And then she saw it, the faint outline of something beneath the jewels, a mask, golden, beautiful, and terrible. Its surface was etched with intricate symbols, and its hollow eyes stared upward through the jewels like something alive. Claire hesitated only a second before brushing the gems aside. The mask's expression was neither human nor divine, it was both. Its mouth was carved open, frozen mid-cry. A whisper filled her mind, not through her ears but deep in her skull. The face of the betrayer must not see light. She dropped the mask instantly, her hands shaking. It clattered against the wood, and for a heartbeat the entire palace seemed to shudder. The chandelier above groaned violently, its chain rattling like a warning bell. Claire jumped down from the scaffold just as another bolt of lightning struck outside. The impact shook the glass dome, sending a crack spidering across it. Rain poured in through the opening, drenching the floor and scattering dust into mist. The jewels shimmered one final time, then dimmed completely. The whispers fell silent. She stood there, soaked, gasping, her heartbeat echoing through the vast hall. The chest now looked lifeless, its treasures nothing more than colored stones. But deep down she knew better. The Queen's voice lingered in her mind, soft, mournful, and resolute. Bury what was taken, protect the living. Claire sank to her knees beside the chest, staring at the dim jewels, the golden mask, the crimson book, all relics of a sin older than she could comprehend. Lightning illuminated her reflection in the puddles spreading across the floor. For a fleeting instant, she saw Amara kneeling beside her, their faces mirrored in water. Two women bound by the same secret. Claire whispered, "I'll put it right." And for the first time, the palace made no sound of protest. Outside, the storm began to quiet, leaving only the soft tapping of rain against glass and the whisper of wind moving gently through open cracks. She closed the chest, locked it, and pressed her palm against the royal crest on its lid. "Rest," she murmured, "you've carried this long enough." The metal grew warmer beneath her touch, a single pulse passing through her hand before fading. Then silence, true silence. For the first time since she'd arrived, Ravencourt felt. Still, transition line for continuity. But as dawn broke over Ravencourt, Claire didn't see the faint shadow that lingered behind her reflection, watching, waiting, knowing the palace had only begun to reveal its price. Dawn arrived quiet and pale, bleeding softly through the storm, washed windows of Ravencourt. The air was still damp, cool, and faintly scented with ash, as though the storm had scrubbed clean not just the sky, but the ghosts that clung to the halls. Claire sat in the great hall beside the sealed chest, the crimson leather book, the Queen's second diary, open on her lap. Its pages trembled slightly beneath her fingertips, fragile and thin as moth wings. The night's terrors felt distant now, replaced by a heavy stillness that demanded to be understood. She read slowly this time, letting the ink and sorrow of each word seep into her bones. "The day they turned on me, the palace burned not from flame, but from hatred. I had loved this place, its marble, its people, its promise of light. But the same hands that once swore loyalty now dragged my throne into the fire." The handwriting wavered, trembling lines of desperation that grew smaller, more hurried with every entry. Claire's eyes blurred as she traced them. "I do not write to be remembered, but to be forgiven." The words hit her like a whisper across time. She could almost hear the Queen's voice, now tired, regal, human. The diary wasn't a chronicle. It was a confession. Claire turned another page, her fingers trembling. Ink stains bloomed like bruises across the parchment. Elias begged me to flee before dawn. He said the council had poisoned the guards, that they would come for my crown. I could not leave it to them, the jewels, the symbols of divine right. I told him I would rather see Ravencourt in ruin than in the hands of liars. Claire leaned closer, heart pounding. Elias, the same name inscribed inside the pendant she'd found beneath the palace. The next line was fainter, ink smeared by what might have been tears. He did not understand that I hid the crown not to preserve it, but to hide my sin. The blood spilled that night was not only theirs. A shiver crawled down her spine. She read on, each page pulling her deeper into a story that felt as alive as her own breath. They will say the queen died in exile. Let them. They will not find me. My body will fade, but my truth will rest within these walls. Whoever finds this know that Ravencourt's curse was my creation. I wove it into stone so that no one would covet what I buried. Claire shut the book gently, her throat tight. The queen hadn't been cursed. She had cursed herself. The morning light spilled through the broken dome above, scattering in shards across the marble floor. The golden pendant at Claire's neck caught the glow, sending faint patterns across the room. The palace seemed to exhale in the silence, neither angry nor haunted now, but heavy with a kind of sorrowful relief. She stood slowly, the diary pressed to her chest. "Amara," she whispered into the empty air, "you tried to protect them, even after everything." Her voice broke. For a long time she just stood there, feeling the enormity of it, one woman's mistake echoing through centuries, now resting in her hands. Then, from somewhere above, a faint sound broke the stillness. Footsteps. Claire froze, turning toward the staircase. The sound wasn't the hesitant shifting of old wood or the creak of settling beams. It was deliberate, slow, steady, human. She set the diary on the table, every nerve tightening. "Hello," her voice echoed through the hall. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. She waited, breath held, eyes fixed on the top of the stairs. Then a figure stepped into view, a man in a dark coat, his silhouette framed by the fractured light pouring through the windows. Her pulse spiked. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man didn't answer right away. He started down the stairs, his movements calm, precise, his gaze never leaving hers. As he reached the landing, the light caught his face, sharp features, tired eyes, an expression she couldn't read. "Claire Donnelly," his voice was smooth, official. "I'm from the Ministry of Cultural Preservation. We received notice that you've occupied the Ravencourt property." Her stomach dropped. "The ministry?" He nodded, stepping closer, his eyes scanning the room, the chest, the open diary, the dust that still hung like mist. "This estate is protected under historical preservation law," he continued. "You were aware of that, weren't you?" Claire hesitated. "The county auction listed it as abandoned property." The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what they told you. But properties like this don't stay unclaimed for long, especially not this one." He took another step forward, his shoes echoing across the marble. "You've found something, haven't you?" The air grew cold again. Claire swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." The man tilted his head. "Let's not play games, Mrs. Donnelly. The ministry's been watching this site for years. We know what's buried here." Her heart thudded in her chest. He smiled, then the kind of smile that knew too much. "The jewels, the royal archive, you've seen them, haven't you?" Claire's voice came out small. "They're not what you think." His eyes narrowed. "Then show me." She hesitated, but something in his tone, something heavy and final, told her she didn't have a choice. Wordlessly, she turned toward the grand hall. The chest still sat where she'd left it, its lid shut, its metal faintly tarnished from the night before. When he saw it, his calm cracked. For the first time, his composure slipped, his eyes widened, his breath hitched. He approached slowly, as though drawn by something magnetic. "My God," he whispered. "It's real." Claire watched him, a sick feeling twisting in her stomach. He crouched before the chest, his hands trembling as he reached for the latch. The moment his skin touched the metal, the faint hum beneath it deepened, that same pulse Claire had felt before, only stronger now. He froze. "Do you hear that?" Claire nodded. "It's the house." He gave a nervous laugh. "Nonsense." But even as he said it, the chandelier above them swayed. Dust rained down in a fine mist. The floor trembled not violently, but rhythmically, like a heartbeat beneath stone. The man looked up, unease flickering in his eyes. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the latch on the chest clicked open on its own. The lid lifted slowly, pushed by unseen hands. Light spilled out, soft, golden, and pulsing like the glow of a living thing. The jewels inside shimmered faintly, reflecting the storm of color across the man's face. He stared, entranced, beautiful. Claire whispered, "Don't touch them." But he didn't hear her or didn't care. His hand reached forward, trembling, greedy. The moment his fingers brushed a ruby, a sharp sound cracked through the air, not thunder, not glass, something deeper, more primal. The light from the jewels flared violently. The man screamed. He stumbled back, clutching his hand, the skin scorched, blackened where he'd touched the gem. His eyes went wide with terror. What is this?" he gasped. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. "It's not treasure, it's a warning." The palace shuddered again, the air thick with a low, vibrating hum. The light dimmed, and the jewels grew still once more. The man backed away, his breath ragged, his face pale. You don't understand what this is worth." Claire met his gaze. "No," she said softly. "I understand exactly what it's worth." Transition line for continuity. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time it wasn't from the storm. Something inside Ravencourt had awakened, and it was no longer whispering. The man from the ministry stood frozen, his burned hand trembling in the pale light seeping through the shattered dome. The jewels inside the chest no longer glowed, but their silence was far more menacing than their shimmer. They lay still, too still, as though listening. Claire didn't move. She watched him carefully, her pulse still thundering in her ears. The air between them felt thick, almost charged with invisible threads. He stared at his hand in disbelief, skin raw and blackened. That's not possible. Claire's voice came low, controlled. "It's not meant to be touched. They're not treasure. They're cursed." He glared at her, fear flickering behind the defiance in his eyes. "Cursed? Don't be ridiculous. These are historical artifacts, priceless. You can't just—" He stopped as the chandelier above them gave a low metallic groan, its fractured crystals trembling like wind chimes caught in a storm that hadn't yet arrived. Claire took a step closer, her tone sharpening. "Whatever they were, they're not yours, not mine, not anyone's. The Queen sealed them here for a reason." He straightened, his expression tightening into something colder. "The Queen's dead, Mrs. Donnelly, and what's dead doesn't get to own history." He knelt beside the chest again, ignoring her warning, and grabbed the edge of the lid with his good hand. "The ministry will take it from here. You can sign over the property and leave quietly." Claire's eyes darkened. "You touch it again and you won't walk out of this house." He smirked at her, but the bravado faltered when a sudden gust of air swept through the hall, strong enough to snuff out the candlelight and send loose papers spiraling. The heavy doors groaned shut behind them with a resounding boom. His voice cracked. "What the hell was that?" Claire didn't answer. Her gaze drifted upward to the ceiling where the mural had once shown storms breaking apart the sky. Now the painted clouds seemed to shift again, just barely, a faint motion that made the air ripple like heat over stone. The palace was breathing again. "Step away from the chest," she said softly. The man looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You don't give orders here." He reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document, the ministry's insignia stamped in red wax. "This property belongs to the state now, effective immediately. You're trespassing." Claire's fear hardened into something else, anger, maybe, or defiance. She had been silent too long, pushed, pitied, dismissed. But this place, this broken, beautiful place, had chosen her. It had shown her truths buried for centuries. She took a slow step forward, her voice steady. "You think this house will let you take what it buried?" He hesitated. "What are you talking about?" The Queen cursed the crown. Claire said, her tone quiet, deliberate. She bound her betrayal to it. "The jewels aren't worth gold, they're worth guilt. They burn anyone who tries to own them." The man's eyes flicked toward the chest, greed and fear warring inside him. "Superstition," he muttered. "Every legend has an origin in fact, and facts can be sold." Claire shook her head slowly. "You didn't feel what I did when it opened. It doesn't want to be found." A sudden sharp crack cut through the air, the chandelier's chain snapping link by link. The man leapt back instinctively as the massive fixture swayed, then crashed down inches from him, scattering glass across the marble floor in an explosion of noise. He stared. Why? Died, his composure breaking. That was the house," Claire whispered. "It's warning you." Lightning flashed through the windows, flooding the hall in white for an instant, and in that instant, something else appeared. The reflection in the floor's puddled water wasn't just theirs. A third figure stood between them, tall, feminine, regal, Queen Amara. The man spun, but the apparition wasn't behind him. She was only visible in the reflection, her form rippling in the sheen of marble-like light caught in water. Her expression was sorrowful, her crown tilted slightly, her hand raised toward the chest. "Do you see her?" Claire asked quietly. He swallowed hard, backing away. It's a trick of the light." The Queen's reflection moved closer, though her real space remained empty. Her mouth opened no sound, only the suggestion of words. Claire watched, breath trembling. "She's saying something." The man turned toward the chest again, his voice breaking with desperation. "It's mine. It belongs to history. Don't." But before she could stop him, he grabbed one of the jewels again, a sapphire the size of a plum. The instant his skin met the stone, the light flared blindingly bright. He screamed. The sound tore through the hall, echoing off marble and glass. The jewel turned black in his palm, smoke rising from his skin. He dropped it with a choked cry, stumbling backward. The palace roared. The walls shuddered, the chandeliers rattled, and the mural above split further, a long crack ripping through the painted storm. Claire fell to her knees, covering her ears as the sound deepened, a deafening, hollow groan like the earth itself waking from centuries of sleep. Then silence. She opened her eyes slowly. The man was gone. Only the sapphire remained, lying dark and dull on the floor. Her pulse raced as she looked around. The doors were shut tight, no sign of him. The air was still again, but the kind of stillness that comes after something irreversible. She stood shakily, her breath ragged. "What did you do with him?" she whispered to the house. No voice answered, only the faint drip of rainwater from the shattered glass dome above. The diary still lay on the table. She picked it up, flipping through the final pages until she found one that hadn't been there before, blank before, now filled with new words written in a hand that trembled but was unmistakable. "The palace keeps its own justice." Claire's vision blurred. She touched the ink, half expecting it to smear, but it was dry as if it had been written long ago. Her throat tightened. "Amara." For a long moment she just stood there, the wind whispering faintly through the cracked window panes. Then she closed the diary and placed it back inside the chest, beside the jewels. "Rest," she said softly. "Your story's safe now." The pendant around her neck pulsed once, then dimmed its glow, fading into stillness. The palace didn't hum anymore. It didn't whisper. It simply listened. Claire sat beside the chest until the light of dawn began to creep once more through the ruins, golden and gentle. The rain had stopped, and with it, the weight pressing down on the house. Outside, the world was quiet, a morning after centuries of storm. And though she didn't know it yet, this peace would not last. For beyond the gates of Ravencourt, the world had already heard whispers of a woman who had found the Queen's lost fortune, and a curse that refused to die. Transition line for continuity. As the morning sun touched the cracked marble, Claire thought the worst was over, but the eyes of those who coveted the past were already turning toward Ravencourt. By the time the ministry official's car disappeared down the fog-drenched road, the silence that followed didn't feel like peace, it felt like surveillance. Every window of Ravencourt seemed to watch her. Every shadow felt like a figure just out of view. Claire locked the front doors, checked the latch, then stood in the great hall staring at the chest she had sealed only hours before. The jewels inside hadn't moved. The diary remained closed, but the air had changed. It felt denser, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. She wanted to believe it was over, but deep down she knew it wasn't. The palace was awake, and now, so were those who had been waiting for someone to awaken it. For the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself to step outside. Mist curled around the front steps, soft and cold against her skin. The gardens stretched out before her, wild and overgrown, but somehow more alive than when she first arrived. Morning dew glistened on the long grass like thousands of watchful eyes. She breathed deeply, feeling the crisp air cut through the lingering weight of the night before. But as her gaze drifted toward the wrought iron gates at the edge of the property, a movement caught her eye. A black car sat parked just beyond the fence. No engine sound, no movement, just there waiting. Her heart quickened. The ministry man had left hours ago. This was someone else. She turned back toward the house, the unease clawing up her spine. Inside, her phone buzzed against the table. A number she didn't recognize flashed across the screen. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." Static filled the line. Then a man's voice, calm and deliberate. "Mrs. Donnelly, this is Agent Harland. I believe you've already met my colleague, Mr. Everett." Her chest tightened. "The one who came here yesterday?" "Yes," the voice replied. "We understand there was an incident." She glanced toward the chest. "He's gone." A long pause on the other end, then measured words. "Gone, ma'am." Claire's hand shook. "The jewels, they burned him." He touched them, and another pause. She could almost hear him writing something down. "Mrs. Donnelly will send a team to investigate. Please remain at the property. Don't touch anything." The line went dead. She stared at the phone, pulse pounding. Something about his voice, too smooth, too calm, didn't sound like someone surprised by her story. It sounded like someone expecting it. The low hum of an approaching vehicle drifted through the fog. A black SUV rolled slowly up the gravel path, headlights dim, engine whisper. Quiet. Claire moved to the window, watching as three figures stepped out, two men in dark coats and a woman with a clipboard. Their movements were precise, coordinated. She opened the door before they could knock. The woman smiled tightly. "Mrs. Donnelly, Agent Harland, Ministry of Preservation." She gestured to the taller man behind her. "This is Officer Reed. We're here to follow up on the disappearance of Inspector Everett." Claire nodded slowly, studying their faces. Harland's expression was calm, polite, but his eyes were cold. Too focused, too calculated. Reed stepped past her into the hall without waiting for permission. His gaze swept the marble floor, the cracked windows, the ceiling. "Place is still standing." Then he muttered. Claire folded her arms. "You make it sound like you expected otherwise." Harland gave a faint smile. Old buildings tend to collapse under pressure, especially those that hold secrets. The woman's tone was light, but her eyes never left the center of the room, the sealed chest. Claire's breath caught. "You've been busy," Harland said softly, approaching the chest. "Records show this estate has been untouched for over 80 years. It's remarkable how much you've uncovered in just a few weeks." "I didn't uncover anything," Claire said carefully. "I restored what was already here." Reed crouched beside the chest, examining the lock. "You opened it?" It wasn't a question. Claire said nothing. He stood slowly, turning toward her. "Mrs. Donnelly, do you understand what you've stumbled onto? These jewels aren't just historical artifacts. They're national property and highly classified." "Classified?" Harland stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Queen Amara wasn't the benevolent figure your little diaries make her out to be. She was involved in treason, smuggling royal assets before the coup. Those jewels were evidence. That's why they were sealed." Claire's pulse quickened. "That's not true, isn't it?" Harland's gaze hardened. "You read her words, didn't you? The guilt, the betrayal. You think she was writing to confess. She was hiding her crime. Those jewels belonged to the people." Claire's throat tightened. "You don't understand. She was protecting them. The jewels, they're dangerous. They don't belong in anyone's hands." Reed snorted. "Dangerous, right. I suppose they talk too." Harland silenced him with a glance. Then, turning back to Claire, his voice softened. "Mrs. Donnelly, no one's accusing you of anything. Yet. But if you cooperate, this will go much smoother. Just tell us where the diary is." Her heart sank. "You already know." Harland's eyes flicked toward the table where the diary lay open. He moved to pick it up. The moment his fingers touched the cover, a soft tremor rolled through the floor, gentle at first, then deeper, louder. The chandeliers swayed again, glass chiming like distant bells. Reed froze. What was that? Harland's grip tightened on the book. Old foundations, nothing more. But Claire saw it, the faint shimmer of gold light rippling across the marble tiles like sunlight on water. It spread outward from the chest, glowing faintly before fading again. "Put it down," she said sharply. Harland ignored her. "What happens if I don't?" The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The diary shuddered in his hands, a deep vibration that made the air hum. He flinched, dropping it instinctively. It landed on the marble with a heavy thud. Claire whispered, "I told you, this house doesn't like thieves." Reed took a step back, eyes darting nervously toward the doors. "Sir, maybe we should." Harland's expression darkened. "We're not leaving." He gestured to the woman near the door. "Seal the perimeter. I don't want anyone coming in or out." Claire's stomach dropped. "You're trapping us in protocol," Harland replied smoothly, "for everyone's safety." The doors locked with a mechanical click that echoed through the empty halls. The palace exhaled a long, deep groan that vibrated in the walls, the floor, the very air. Claire stepped back slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have done that." Above them, the cracked dome flickered with light, again soft gold at first, then sharp and blinding, like lightning trapped behind glass. The Queen's curse had awakened again, and this time it wasn't whispering, it was watching. Transition line for continuity. As the locks sealed behind them and the light flared above, Claire realized this wasn't an investigation, it was a siege. The locks clicked into place with a finality that sent a chill through the air. Ravencourt had sealed itself again. The three officials from the ministry didn't seem to notice the shift, not in the sound, not in the weight of the silence that followed. But Claire did. She felt it, like a heartbeat beneath her skin, like the house itself was drawing breath through her lungs. Agent Harland stood motionless in the center of the hall, the diary at his feet, his jaw tight with irritation. Officer Reed paced near the chest, muttering under his breath. The woman Harper, she'd called herself, typed furiously on a small tablet, though her hands trembled more than she realized. Claire took a step back toward the staircase, keeping her distance. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You shouldn't have locked the doors. This house doesn't like cages." Reed scoffed. "It's a pile of bricks, lady, not a living thing." But even as he said it, the chandelier above gave a low groan. A few crystals swayed gently on their chains, catching faint light from the fractured dome. Harlan's gaze flicked upward, foundations shifting. He muttered, "Old structures do that." Claire's lips curved in a cold half-smile. "Old structures don't breathe." The air shifted again, not a gust this time, but a movement, like the house exhaling through its very walls. The candles lining the hall flickered as though a hand had brushed past them. Harper froze, her tablet screen glitching, lines of code jumping erratically. "Sir," she said quietly, "we're losing connection. No signal, no GPS either." Harlan frowned, checking his own phone. "Deadline." Claire's voice came soft, threaded with both fear and certainty. "It's shutting you out." Reed turned, glaring at her. "You think this is funny, whatever tricks you've been playing. I haven't done anything." Lightning flared outside, white fire flashing across the broken stained glass, scattering crimson and gold across the floor. For one heartbeat, the reflection of Queen Amara's mural appeared again, not still, but moving. Her painted eyes glimmered alive. Reed stopped mid-sentence, his voice caught in his throat. "Did you see?" Before he could finish, a deep crack echoed through the hall. The marble beneath the chest split slightly, just enough to send a ripple through the ground. The chest trembled. Claire took another step back. "It's warning us." Harlan's patience snapped enough. He motioned for Reed. "Open it." Reed blinked. "What? Open the chest?" Harlan ordered. "We need to see what's inside." Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't." Reed hesitated, glancing between her and his superior. "Sir, with respect, after what happened to Everett." Harlan's expression hardened. "You think I'm afraid of an old superstition?" He knelt and pressed his fingers to the lock. The moment his skin touched metal, a faint vibration passed through the air, the same low hum Claire had come to recognize. The same hum that always came before something terrible. "Sir," Harper said uneasily, "something's—" But Harlan had already turned the latch. The chest opened. The jewels inside glimmered faintly, catching the last threads of lightning through the windows. They looked dead at first, lifeless glass. Then, slowly, the glow began, soft, subtle, pulsing like the echo of a heartbeat. Reed stumbled backward. "That's God, that's not possible." The gold light bled across the marble floor, casting distorted reflections on their faces. It climbed the walls, reaching the murals, the pillars, even the fractured glass dome above. Claire whispered, "You woke it." Harlan stood frozen, his eyes locked on the jewels. "Incredible." He murmured, "You can feel it, can't you? The energy." He reached inside. Claire shouted, "Don't touch them." But his fingers were already around a ruby the size of a fist. The moment he lifted it, the hum deepened into a roar. The lights above shattered every bulb, every candle plunging the room into darkness. Then came the whisper, soft, lingering, everywhere, "The thief returns." Harlan dropped the jewel, stumbling back. "What was that?" Claire's voice shook. "The Queen. She warned you." The ruby rolled across the marble and stopped at her feet, glowing brighter and brighter until its light painted the walls in crimson. From that red glow, faint shapes began to form, silhouettes of soldiers, courtiers, figures bowing and betraying in the same instant. History replayed itself in the light. Harper gasped. "What is this, a projection?" "No," Claire said softly, tears forming in her eyes. "It's memory." The palace was showing them what it remembered. The room darkened further, until only the glow from the ruby illuminated the space. The phantom shapes moved faster now, the queen in her emerald robes, the fire consuming the ballroom, the betrayal in the eyes of those she'd trusted. And then silence. The light flickered once, twice, and went out. When the darkness cleared, the ruby was gone. So was Officer Reed. Harper screamed, "Where is he?" Claire spun, scanning the hall, but he was nowhere, only a faint outline of ash where he had stood seconds ago. Harlan's face drained of color. "What did you do?" Claire met his gaze, her voice low, trembling. "It's not me. It's her. You were warned." The air grew thick again, pressing against their lungs. The murals above began to fade, colors leaching away until only outlines remained, like the palace itself was erasing its past. The queen's voice rose one final time, echoing through the hall, clear, mournful, eternal. "Those who take from the dead, join them." Harper dropped to her knees, sobbing, clutching her head. "We have to leave. We have to leave." Harlan stood in silence, staring at the place where the ruby had vanished, his breath shallow. "She's real," he whispered, "after all these years." Claire stepped toward him slowly, voice steady despite her fear. "You came for power. She'll give you judgment instead." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "You don't understand, Mrs. Donnelly. This isn't about power. It's about control. The palace, the queen, they're not legends. They're mechanisms. Someone made this." Claire froze. "What are you talking about?" Harlan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Ravencourt was more than a royal estate. It was a vault. And if what's in that chest is what I think it is, the jewels aren't cursed, they're technology." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "Technology? From the 1800s? He smiled faintly, eyes wild. "Older." Before she could answer, a sharp gust tore through the hall, knocking them both off balance. The diary on the floor flipped open to its final page, ink bleeding through the parchment, until one last line appeared, words neither had seen before. "The truth is not buried in stone, but in blood." The golden pendant around Claire's neck began to glow again, brighter than before, its pulse syncing with the hum of the palace. Harlan stared at it, realization dawning. "It's responding to you." Claire gripped the pendant tightly. "No, it's responding to her." The ground trembled beneath them. Dust fell like snow from the rafters. Somewhere deep within the palace, the sound of grinding gears echoed through the walls, ancient, awakening. Harper screamed again as a door at the end of the hall blew open with a force that sent splinters flying. Beyond it, darkness beckoned, not empty, but breathing. Claire took a step toward it, pendant blazing in her hand. Harlan grabbed her arm. "Don't. Whatever's in there." She looked at him, her expression calm, resolute. It's what she wanted found. And before he could stop her, she stepped into the dark. Transition line for continuity. The air swallowed her whole, the light from her pendant fading into black, and with it, the last illusion that Ravencourt's curse was ever just a legend. The storm returned that night, sudden, brutal, and loud enough to drown the heartbeat of the house. Lightning clawed at the cracked dome, and rain poured in through the gaps in the roof, drenching the marble floors that once shimmered like mirrors. The power had gone out hours ago, and the palace now pulsed only with the cold glow of Claire's pendant, swaying faintly at her throat like a living flame. She sat huddled in the library, staring at the diary spread before her. The words written by Queen Amara blurred through her tears. So much had happened, too much, and yet the story refused to end. Harlan was gone. Harper had fled into the storm, screaming, her flashlight vanishing into the fog. And Claire had followed the Queen's call through the dark passage, only to emerge into a silence so thick it felt eternal. Now, Ravencourt held its breath again, the quiet before a new kind of storm. Claire lifted her head when the first sound came. A noise she hadn't heard since the night she moved in. Footsteps, not echoes, not the whispers of memory, real ones, boots scraping against stone, slow, cautious, and too deliberate to be ghosts. She froze. The sound came from the west corridor, the same one that led to the main hall. She reached for her flashlight, its beam slicing through the dust and cobwebs as she rose slowly from the chair. "Hello?" Her voice trembled despite her effort to sound firm. No answer, only the steady rhythm of steps drawing closer. Her pulse spiked. She killed the light, plunging the library into darkness, and pressed herself against the wall. The faintest glow from her pendant bled into the air, just enough to cast ghostly shapes of the shelves around her. The footsteps stopped. Then came the creak of a door hinged the door to the library. Her breath caught in her throat. A sliver of light cut through the darkness as the door opened, and a figure slipped inside, tall, hooded, moving with predatory silence. Another followed, shorter, broader, carrying a flashlight turned low. The beam crawled across the walls, catching dust and decay. "Search every room." A voice whispered a man's, gravelly and controlled. "She's here. Keep quiet." Claire's heart hammered so hard she was afraid they'd hear it. She backed away slowly, bare feet silent against the old carpet, until her shoulder hit the bookshelf behind her. The pendant's glow flared faintly with her rising panic. She cupped it in her hand to hide it. The beam of the flashlight passed just inches from her face, illuminating the edge of a table, then swept away again. "Nothing here," one of the intruders muttered. "She could have run." "She hasn't," the first man replied. "There's only one car outside, and she's not stupid enough to leave the jewels behind." Claire's stomach twisted. They knew. Her mind raced. The chest was still in the great hall, exactly where she'd left it, sealed, untouched, guarded only by whatever consciousness pulsed within Ravencourt's walls. If they tried to take it. She stepped sideways, feeling along the wall until her hand found the edge of a narrow servant door. She'd discovered days ago one that led into the warren of hidden corridors beneath the west wing. She slipped inside soundlessly, closing it just as one of the men turned toward the noise. "Wait." The flashlight beam froze on the far side of the room. "I heard something," the second man said. "The first side." "Then check it." Claire pressed herself against the cold stone, holding her breath as the beam of light swept across the cracks of the door. She could smell the mildew, the wet air rising from the old tunnels below. Her heart beat so violently she thought it might shake the door. After what felt like forever, the sound receded. They were moving away. She exhaled quietly and began to move through the tunnel, her bare feet sinking into damp dust. The walls here were older brick and bone, white mortar, lined with rusted iron sconces. The air grew colder with every step until even her breath turned to mist. Water dripped somewhere ahead, steady and slow. Then another sound, not water, a metallic clang, and voices. Claire froze again. "They said the jewels are under the floor, right?" A voice murmured, "Not the men from the library." New voices. Another answered, "No, they said it's in a chest, gold latch, crest on top. If it's real, we're set for life." Her blood ran cold. There weren't just two intruders, there were several. They were all inside the palace. And they were hunting. Claire pressed her back against the wall, whispering a silent prayer. The pendant against her chest pulsed once softly, like reassurance. She followed the tunnel deeper, every muscle tense. It curved downward, leading toward the sub-basement, the old servants' quarters, long collapsed and half flooded. She had never gone this far before. When she reached the end, she found a small iron gate. Rusted, nearly fused shut. She pushed it open just enough to squeeze through, the sound sharp and shrill in the silence. The tunnel opened into a narrow chamber lit by faint moonlight from a grating above. She could see the outline of a staircase leading upward and exit back into the east corridor. But before she could move, a shadow crossed the light. Someone was above her. The grating groaned, and a voice filtered down. "You sure she's still in here?" "She's here," another replied. "She found something she shouldn't have. Orders are to bring her alive." Claire's breath caught. Alive, whoever they were, this wasn't just robbery. It was retrieval. She backed deeper into the shadows, the cold stone biting her palms as she crouched behind a collapsed beam. The men above moved on, their boots thudding faintly. When the sound faded, she slipped out through the other end of the chamber, following the narrow crawl space that led back toward the grand hall. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, but she didn't stop. She had to get to the chest before they did. When she emerged at last into the main hall, the rain had slowed, but the air still crackled with energy, the faint hum of the palace, alive again. The chest stood exactly where she'd left it, bathed in the weak glow of moonlight. Claire approached cautiously, the pendant flickering against her skin. "Please," she whispered, looking up at the painted storm still rippling across the ceiling. "Don't let them take it." The air stirred. A low moan rolled through the house, almost like a voice answering. Then she heard the footsteps again, pounding now, closing in from the corridor. There was no time. She ran to the side wall and yanked open the narrow door leading to the servants' stairwell, dragging the chest with all her strength until it scraped against the marble. Her arms screamed in protest. The footsteps grew louder, voices shouted, "She's in there." Claire heaved one final pull. The chest slid into the tunnel just as the main doors burst open. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, landing on the spot where she'd stood seconds before. There, she's moving through the tunnels. Claire slammed the secret door behind her, plunging into the black. Her breath came ragged, echoing through the narrow corridor as she dragged the chest down the uneven stairs. The palace groaned and shuddered above her, as though straining to hold its breath. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew closer, boots, shouts, the metallic snap of a gun being cocked. Her pendant flared bright enough to blind her for a second, and then, impossibly, the walls themselves shifted. The stairway twisted, the path she had taken moments ago vanishing behind her like the house itself had changed its layout. The men's voices faded, confused, shouting somewhere above. Claire stopped, gasping for breath, clutching the chest tight. The palace had done it. It had hidden her. She sank to the floor, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Above, thunder rolled again, and through the shaking stone she could almost hear it, the faint echo of a woman's voice. "Keep running." Claire closed her eyes, pressing her hand to the pendant. "I'm not giving up." And for the first time that night, she didn't feel alone. Transition line for continuity. But as she followed the tunnel deeper into the earth, Claire had no idea the palace was leading her somewhere. Even the Queen had sealed away the chamber that had never been on any map. The tunnel stretched endlessly, twisting through the dark like the vein of some ancient beast buried beneath the earth. Claire's hands were slick with sweat and dirt, her breath shallow and uneven. The chest scraped behind her, its iron corners leaving deep grooves in the damp floor. The air was colder now, thicker, carrying the faint smell of salt and metal. She could still hear them above, the intruders, boots hammering on stone, echoing down from the floors she had fled. Shouts muffled by distance, but relentless. They were sweeping the corridors, tearing through doors, overturning furniture. Desperate, methodical, hungry. The house had hidden her once. It might not do it again. She stopped for a moment, pressing her ear against the tunnel wall. The low hum of Ravencourt's pulse was still there, faint, steady, rhythmic. The same sound she'd felt since her first night inside the palace, but now it was slower, weaker. "Don't fade on me," she whispered. "Please." The pendant at her throat pulsed in answer, a single flicker of light that reflected against the iron bands of the chest. Claire forced herself to keep going. The tunnel narrowed, forcing her to crawl, dragging the chest with one arm at a time. Each movement scraped her palms raw. She didn't know how far she'd gone when she finally saw it. A faint golden glow at the end of the corridor, a door. She pulled herself forward, trembling, until her hand brushed wood. The door was carved with the same crest that had followed her through every nightmare of this house. The crown and the lily crossed by a sword, the symbol of Ravencourt. Claire swallowed hard and whispered, truth unburied. The door swung open with a slow, ancient sigh. Inside was a chamber unlike anything she had seen before. It wasn't grand or gilded like the rest of the palace. It was raw stone, walls unadorned, floor uneven, air thick with age. Candles, long dead, lined the walls in rusted sconces. At the center stood a marble pedestal covered in dust and cobwebs, as if untouched for centuries. The hum of the palace was louder here. It vibrated in her bones, steady and deep. Claire dragged the chest forward and set it at the base of the pedestal. She collapsed beside it, gasping, her muscles shaking from exhaustion. For a few moments all she could do was breathe. Then she saw something that made her freeze. There were words carved into the pedestal itself, barely visible beneath layers of grime. She brushed the surface clean with trembling hands. Let the keeper bear the burden, the house remembers. Her throat tightened, the keeper. The queen's last words echoed in her memory, when the palace breathes again, so shall her truth. Claire looked around. This was where it had begun, the source, the heart of Ravencourt. A noise above shattered her thoughts. Footsteps again, this time closer. Echoes traveling down the tunnel, voices too. She went this way. They'd found the entrance. Panic clawed up her chest. She tried to move the chest behind the pedestal, but it was too heavy. There was nowhere to hide. Her gaze darted to the pendant. Its light flickered rapidly, pulsing in rhythm with the hum that now filled the chamber. It was resonating, reacting to something. She held it up, the crystal glowing brighter, until the entire room was bathed in soft gold. The carvings on the walls began to change, shadows revealing murals beneath the dust. Scenes of the queen's life appeared in the shifting light. Her coronation, her court, the fire that destroyed her empire. And there, in the final image, Amara stood before the same pedestal, her hands resting on the chest. A message carved below it read, "To the one who opens this chamber, I name you keeper." Claire stared at the words, realization dawning like a slow, painful sunrise. The palace hadn't chosen her by accident. It had called her. The voices grew louder, flashlights flickered through the tunnel. Down here, Claire's pulse thundered. She looked around the chamber desperately. There was no second exit, no ladder, no escape. Only the pedestal and the chest. "Hide the light," she whispered, clutching the pendant. "Hide us." The glow dimmed instantly, plunging the room into darkness. She crouched beside the pedestal, barely breathing as the intruders poured into the tunnel. Their lights bounced off the walls, their footsteps echoing closer. "She's here somewhere." The first man entered the chamber, his flashlight cutting through the dark. His eyes fell on the chest, and his voice broke with greed. "There, that's it. Take it." Another hissed. The man lunged forward, then stopped mid-step. His light flickered, his breath catching. "What the?" The hum in the chamber rose suddenly, deep and resonant. The walls vibrated. Dust fell from the ceiling. "Do you feel that?" someone shouted. Claire pressed herself tighter against the stone, whispering under her breath, "Please, protect it." The air thickened. The hum became a roar. The men staggered, clutching their heads. Their flashlights died, plunging them into darkness. Then the whisper returned. The thief returns. The same voice, the same cold tone that had condemned Harland. One man screamed as his light flickered back on, only to reveal his reflection staring back at him from the stone wall, eyes hollow, face pale. He stumbled back, but his reflection didn't move. It only smiled. Another intruder fired his gun blindly into the dark. The sound cracked like thunder. Bullets hit stone, sparks flashing, but the walls didn't break. Instead, the palace answered. The floor split open. A fissure tore through the chamber, a deep, glowing seam of gold light. The chest slid dangerously close to the edge. No, Claire lunged forward, grabbing it, dragging it back inch by inch. The heat from the light seared her palms, but she didn't let go. Behind her, the intruders stumbled and screamed as the fissure widened, swallowing them one by one. Their voices vanished into the light, echoing into nothingness, and then silence. The fissure sealed itself with a hiss, leaving only scorched stone and the scent of iron. Claire knelt on the floor, gasping, her hands blistered, her body trembling. The pendant's glow faded to a dim ember. "Thank you," she whispered into the stillness. The chamber was silent now, completely still. Only the faint heartbeat of Ravencourt remained. She looked at the chest, half open from the fall. Inside, the jewels no longer glowed. They lay cold, inert, their power spent. Only one thing shimmered faintly among them, the Queen's pendant twin, the crystal's light flickering softly like a dying flame. Claire reached for it, her hand shaking. The crystal pulsed once, bright enough to fill the chamber, and in that light she saw her, Queen Amara, standing across from her, face gentle, eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. The Queen's voice was soft. "You've done what I could not. The curse is ending." Claire swallowed hard, tears streaking through the dirt on her face. "Then why does it still feel unfinished?" The Queen stepped closer, her image shimmering in the golden haze. "Because truth is never found in treasure. It's found in what you choose to protect." Her hand brushed Claire's shoulder, weightless, warm, and then she was gone. The light faded completely, leaving only darkness. Claire sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the palace's heart slowing, softening, settling into peace. When she finally stood, her body weak but her resolve strong, she looked toward the tunnel. The air there was clear now, no voices, no footsteps. Ravencourt was silent once more, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of survival. Transition line for continuity. As Claire carried the chest through the sleeping tunnels, she didn't realize the world above was already stirring, and soon, the palace's buried secret would no longer belong only to her. The first sunlight in days crept through the shattered dome of Ravencourt Palace, touching every broken edge with soft gold. The storm had passed. The air no longer smelled of fire or fear, but of rain and quiet earth. Yet beneath that calm, Claire felt something vast shifting, not in the house, but in her. She had survived the night. The intruders were gone, swallowed by the same unseen power that had defended the Queen's secret. The palace had gone still again, as though exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. The hum she had come to fear now throbbed faintly like a heartbeat at rest, steady, peaceful, waiting. Claire stood in the great hall, staring at the chest she had dragged from the tunnels. It sat beneath the torn mural of Queen Amara's storm, streaks of sunlight gliding over its scarred lid. The jewels inside no longer shimmered. Their glow had died when the fissure sealed their magic, their curse, perhaps their soul, extinguished with the Queen's final whisper. And yet, the air around the chest still pulsed softly, like the echo of a prayer not yet finished. Claire knelt before it, brushing her hand over the crest carved into its surface. "You can rest now," she whispered. "It's over," but the palace disagreed. A faint vibration rippled beneath her fingers, and for the first time since she had found the chest, the hum came not from the walls, but from below. Her brow furrowed. She pressed her ear against the marble floor. The sound was there soft, steady, like the rhythmic turning of old gears deep underground. The palace wasn't finished. It was guiding her again. She rose, following the sound through the corridor that led back toward the west wing. Sunlight poured through broken windows, cutting through the dust like beams through water. The house felt alive again, not haunted, not angry, but awake. The vibration grew stronger the farther she walked. Beneath the faded portraits and cracked archways, the pulse in the floor quickened until she found herself standing before a door she had never seen. It was small, plain half, hidden behind a curtain of ivy that had crept in through the open wall. She brushed the vines aside and turned the rusted handle. It resisted for a moment, then gave way with a sigh of ancient hinges. Behind it lay a narrow stairway descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and sweet, laced with the faint scent of incense and stone. Claire hesitated. Then, clutching her pendant, she whispered, "Show me." The crystal glowed faintly, casting enough light to reveal the steps spiraling down. She descended slowly, her hand trailing along the cold wall. Each step she took seemed to echo back 1,000 times, as if the very air was made of memory. When she reached the bottom, she stopped, her breath caught in her throat. The chamber was vast, circular, carved from white marble streaked with gold veins. The air was warm, alive, and glowed faintly with a light that seemed to have no source. And in the center of the room stood an altar, not an altar of worship, but of promise. It was covered in inscriptions, symbols she recognized from the diary and the Queen's crest. Across its front were carved words that shimmered when her pendant's light touched them. Here the crown was laid to rest. Here oaths were made to protect the light. Claire's eyes stung. The Chamber of Oaths. She had found it the heart of Ravencourt, the place the Queen's diary had whispered about but never described. Every surface of the room told a story. Murals painted directly into the marble showed scenes of the Queen's final days, her guards turning on her, the burning palace, the sealing of the crown. In the last mural, Amara knelt at this very altar, her hands cupping a faint golden light. Above her, carved into the ceiling in a circle of Latin script, were words Claire translated instinctively. "Truth shall crown the keeper." Her breath trembled. "Veritas coronabit," the same phrase that had been carved into the mural of the great hall. It was all connected: the ceiling, the diary, the jewels, the curse. The palace had been a living covenant all along. Claire approached the altar slowly, reverently. The air grew warmer as she neared it. Her pendant pulsed stronger with every step. When she reached the base, she saw another inscription she hadn't noticed before, one hidden in shadow. She bent low to read it. "To the one who restores what was broken, the Queen's burden shall become her gift." Her fingers brushed the carved letters, and the chamber trembled. Light blossomed from the walls, soft and golden. It rippled across the marble, filling the room with warmth. The Queen's voice rose again, not whispering this time, but clear, resonant, strong. "Let it be known the curse was not of vengeance, but of silence. Those who silence truth shall perish, but those who bear it shall be crowned in light." Claire's eyes flooded with tears. "You weren't hiding wealth," she whispered. "You were hiding truth." The air shimmered, and from within the altar, a faint metallic gleam caught her eye. She reached forward and lifted a small, intricate object, a diadem, fragile and beautiful, its gold dulled by centuries of dust. The missing crown, she held it up to the light. The pendant at her throat flared, and the diadem's gems flickered awake one by one, not in brilliance, but in gentle radiance, each stone glowing with its own heartbeat. The Queen's voice softened. "The true crown is not of gold, but of truth carried in hands uncorrupted." As the light dimmed, Claire sank to her knees, clutching the crown to her chest. For the first time, she felt no fear, only clarity. The curse was never meant to punish greed. It was meant to protect the sacred act of truth, telling, to shield legacy from corruption. And now, She was its witness. The hum that filled the chamber changed. It grew brighter, warmer, almost musical. The walls glowed as though the palace itself sighed in relief, but the peace was fleeting. A low rumble rolled through the ground above, followed by a distant sound of voices, faint, muffled, too far away to be clear but too organized to be ghosts. Claire stiffened. Reporters, historians, or more men from the ministry. The outside world had found Ravencourt. Her hand tightened around the diadem. She looked around the chamber, searching for a place to hide it. Behind the altar, she saw a small recess carved into the wall exactly the size of a crown. She hesitated, heart pounding. The Queen had hidden it here once. Could she risk doing the same? The Queen's voice came one last time, soft, like a mother's farewell. The truth must rise, but not unguarded. Choose wisely, keep her. Claire pressed her lips together, tears welling again. Then I'll guard it, but not with silence, with light. She set the diadem gently into the recess. As her fingers left it, the crown's glow dimmed and then vanished completely, the wall sealing itself with a faint ripple. The hum quieted to a whisper. The chamber of oaths returned to stillness. Claire rose slowly, the pendant dim now, its task complete. She placed a hand on the altar, whispering, "Thank you." And for a fleeting second, she felt warmth against her palm, a final pulse of gratitude from the house itself. Then, footsteps echoed faintly down the stairwell behind her. Voices, flashlights, they were coming. She took one last look at the altar, at the walls that now gleamed faintly with peace, and turned toward the stairs. "Time to tell your story," she whispered. And with that, she began the climb back to the world above, not as a trespasser or a victim, but as the last keeper of Ravencourt's truth. Transition line for continuity. As she reached the top of the stairs, the morning light hit her face, and for the first time since she bought the palace, Claire no longer felt like she was running from the past. She was walking straight into it. By the time Claire emerged from the stairwell, the sunlight had changed. It wasn't the soft gold of dawn anymore. It was sharp and white, spilling through the shattered dome like judgment. Dust glittered in the air, falling around her in slow motion. The palace no longer felt abandoned. It felt aware. The hum that had followed her since the day she first walked through its doors was now gone. In its place was something subtler, a stillness that felt like satisfaction, as though Ravencourt had finally completed what it had waited centuries to finish. Claire stood in the center of the great hall, her hand still on the pendant that no longer glowed. Beneath her, the faint vibrations in the marble floor had ceased. The house had gone to sleep again, but the silence didn't last long. A low murmur came from outside voices, dozens of them. She walked toward the front doors, cautious, her boots crunching on fallen plaster. Through the slanted beams of light, she could see movement beyond the cracked windows, figures gathering at the gates. Reporters, officials, locals. Word had spread. The story of the cursed palace treasure had leaked, carried by those who had tried to steal from her and never returned. Rumors of gold, ghosts, and death had done what centuries of silence could not. They had woken the world's hunger. Claire's heart pounded. She turned back toward the chest. It sat where she'd left it, now nothing more than an empty relic. The jewels inside were lifeless, stripped of their unnatural light. Beautiful, yes, but harmless. She lifted the diary that rested beside it. Its pages were dry now, no longer shimmering with spectral ink. But the words remained, Amara's truth, her confession, her redemption. Claire closed the book gently, whispering, "You're free." The sound of an engine broke her focus. A black vehicle pulled up the gravel drive, sleek, official, polished. The doors opened, and a small group stepped out. Men in suits, a few with the ministry's crest pinned to their jackets, others holding cameras. The first man to reach the steps called out, "Mrs. Donnelly." Claire hesitated. "Who's asking?" He held up an ID badge. Deputy Minister Colton, Department of Antiquities. We were informed of a discovery. Discovery, she repeated, her tone cool. Or evidence? The man smiled politely, too politely. Perhaps both. May we come in? Claire stepped aside slowly. You already planned to. They entered in a line, cautious, reverent, but with a kind of greed disguised as professionalism. Their eyes roamed across the cracked walls and scattered dust, trying to see past the ruin to what they truly wanted: value. Colton's gaze landed on the chest. Is this it? Claire said nothing. He knelt, brushing away the dust on its lid. A magnificent craftsmanship, 17th century detail, remarkable preservation. It's more than craftsmanship, she said softly. It's history. He nodded absently, motioning to the others. Document it. Every inch. We'll have it moved to a secure location. No. The single word hung heavy in the air. Colton straightened, his polite tone cracking. Excuse me, you can't move it. Claire said, her voice steady. It belongs here. Mrs. Donnelly, the state has jurisdiction over any recovered antiquities of royal origin. These aren't antiques. She interrupted. They're part of a promise. The room fell quiet. Her voice lowered, carrying the calm certainty of someone who had walked through both death and truth. The Queen didn't hide these jewels for glory or wealth. She sealed them because the people who wanted them destroyed everything good in her world. You move that chest, and you'll wake what she died trying to silence. Colton's expression tightened. You're emotional, understandably so, but if there's no threat, there's always a threat, Claire said. It just changes faces. The man's jaw flexed. Mrs. Donnelly, the ministry will decide what's done with this, not you. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same arrogance she'd seen in Everett, in Harland, in the ones who came for power and called it preservation. She stepped closer, the pendant catching the light at her throat. The last man who said that to me is gone. Colton's eyes flickered toward it. What is that? A gift, she said quietly, and a warning. A murmur rippled among the others. Cameras clicked softly. One of the men whispered, "She's not giving it up." Colton exhaled slowly, as though regaining composure. Very well. We'll note your objection in the record, but I'll need you to accompany us for a full statement. Claire's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. You can write whatever you want, but Ravencourt speaks for itself. She turned away before he could respond, crossing the hall toward the grand staircase. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. As she reached the landing, the light through the dome intensified, flooding the room in blinding white. The officials below shielded their eyes. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment, the woman and the light, the house and its silence. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the palace itself had awakened again. When the brightness faded, Claire stood still, framed by sun and ruin. Take your photographs, she said softly, but remember, this truth doesn't belong to those who take it. It belongs to those who protect it. No one spoke. She turned, walking down the east corridor, leaving them behind. Her steps were sure now, not the hurried pace of a frightened woman, but the stride of someone who had found her purpose. Outside, the world was stirring. Press had gathered. Drones hovered overhead, broadcasting the discovery. Across every screen and headline, Ravencourt treasure found. Woman claims curse is real. She paused at the doorway, looking out at the rising chaos. The crowd buzzed, voices merging into a single hungry hum. Behind her, the palace stood in silence, solemn, vast, and dignified. Claire turned to it one last time. The cracked dome caught the sun perfectly, refracting it into a single beam that fell across the chest, painting it in gold. It almost looked alive, she whispered. You kept your promise, now it's my turn. Then she stepped outside. The air was cool and bright. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, but Claire didn't look back. She walked straight through the crowd, calm, composed, the pendant at her throat gleaming softly, the echo of Amara's voice still in her mind. The truth shall crown the keeper. And for the first time, Claire understood. The crown was never the treasure. It was the burden of knowing the truth and choosing to protect it. Behind her, the palace stood silent, not abandoned, not cursed, but fulfilled. And as the last of the sunlight caught the broken stained glass above the entrance, a faint reflection shimmered across its surface, the image of two women, centuries apart, standing side by side in golden light. Queen Amara and Claire Donnelly, the last and the first keepers of Ravencourt, transition line for continuity, but as the world clamored for her story, Claire knew the palace's truth was only half told, because what she found below was never just history, it was destiny waiting to rise again. The news spread faster than she could breathe. By noon, Ravencourt Palace was no longer a forgotten ruin. It was a headline. Across every network, every channel, every glowing screen, her name echoed like thunder through the veins of a hungry world. Claire Donnelly, the woman who found the Queen's cursed fortune. Journalists camped along the gates. Helicopters buzzed in the sky. The long, dead halls that once whispered only to ghosts now pulsed with the noise of the living. But Claire didn't hear any of it. She sat alone inside the Queen's study, surrounded by documents, diaries, fragments of truth, all the evidence she'd spent weeks unearthing. The room smelled faintly of ink and dust, a reminder that this wasn't just a discovery. It was a confession carved into stone. On the table before her, the pendant glowed faintly. It hadn't dimmed completely since the morning. Every pulse of its golden light matched her heartbeat. Outside, the press screamed her name. Inside, she whispered one word under her breath: justice. She had sent copies of the Queen's writings, the diary, the maps, even the inscriptions, to the local historians' guild that morning. She had nothing left to hide, and no reason to. But she knew what came next. The ministry would come back, and this time they wouldn't come with questions. Thunder rolled in the distance again, though the sky was clear. The palace seemed to hum beneath her feet, not in fear, but in readiness. Claire looked up as the heavy doors creaked open. The sound was slow, deliberate, like the turning of fate itself. A familiar voice followed, cold, controlled. "I warned you this wasn't over." Agent Harland stepped into the room. He looked different now, his perfect composure fractured by exhaustion and fury. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with sleepless rage. Behind him came two other men in black, their movements sharp, military, precise. Claire didn't flinch. "You survived." Harland's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "You sound disappointed. I thought the house swallowed you like the others." "Oh, it tried," he said softly, stepping closer. "But unlike them, I listened. I didn't fight it." He tapped his chest lightly. "It showed me things you couldn't possibly understand." Claire's voice remained steady. "I understand more than you think." He stopped a few feet from her, his eyes darting to the pendant around her neck. "You kept it. It kept me." Harland's expression flickered. "Envy, fascination, something darker. That crystal isn't what you think. It's a transmitter, not a relic, a remnant of something older than Amara's reign. The Queen wasn't guarding a curse, she was guarding power." Claire shook her head. "You still don't get it. She wasn't protecting power. She was protecting people from it. You think history needs protecting." His tone sharpened. "History is a weapon, Mrs. Donnelly. You can erase it or use it. And for centuries, men like me have made sure it serves the right hands. Your hands," she said bitterly. He smiled faintly. "The state's hands. The people don't need myths. They need control." The pendant flickered between them, reacting to his words. Claire could feel it, heat spreading across her collarbone like a warning. "Leave," she said quietly, "before the palace decides it's had enough of you." Harland chuckled. "Do you really believe this house has a mind of its own?" She met his eyes. "I don't believe, I know." The lights overhead flickered. Dust trembled from the beams above. The The two men behind him shifted uneasily, glancing around. Harland ignored them. You turned a discovery into a spectacle. Do you know how many men I had to silence just to keep this place off the record? And now it's front page news. That's exactly why it's over, Claire said. You can't bury the truth anymore. His voice lowered to a hiss. Truth is what we decide it is. The moment the words left his mouth, the air shifted. The chandelier above swayed violently, its broken crystals clinking like warning bells. The golden light from her pendant blazed, filling the room with an eerie, pulsating glow. Harland froze. What's happening? The house doesn't like liars, Claire said softly. A thunderous crack tore through the ceiling. Dust poured down like sand. The hum that had been sleeping beneath the marble returned with full force. Alive, angry, protective. The two guards stepped back, one drawing his gun. Sir, we need to move. Stand down, Harland snapped, though his voice trembled now. Claire's eyes glinted in the golden light. You came here for control. You'll leave with a lesson instead. The floor rumbled, and from the wall behind the Queen's portrait, the plaster began to split. A hidden seam opened, revealing the mural of Amara that Claire had first uncovered in the ballroom. Only this time, the Queen's painted eyes seemed to burn with living light. Harland stumbled back, shielding his face. What the hell is that? The truth, Claire said, the real kind. A voice filled the room then, not from the air but from the walls. It was layered, echoing through centuries, powerful and unrelenting. He who silences truth shall wear its weight. The Queen's voice. Harland's guards turned and bolted for the door, but it slammed shut on its own, sealing them in. The sound reverberated like a gunshot. Harland's panic broke through his mask. Stop this, he shouted. You don't know what you're dealing with. Claire stepped closer, her voice calm in contrast to his fear. You're right, I don't know everything, but she does. The pendant pulsed brighter than ever, golden light swirling outward until the entire study was bathed in it. Harland fell to his knees, hands clutching his head as the light reflected in his eyes. Visions filled the room. The Queen's final night, the betrayal of her council, the sealing of the chamber, every act of deceit, every drop of blood spilled in greed, all of it painted in fire and memory. Harland gasped. It's real. Claire's voice trembled. Now you see. The light swelled until it was blinding, pouring out through the cracks of the windows, shooting into the gray sky like a beacon. Outside, the reporters and officials shouted, shielding their eyes. Cameras caught the blaze as it illuminated the entire facade of Ravencourt Palace. From the outside, it looked like the house itself was on fire again, but this time it wasn't burning, it was purging. Inside, Harland's screams turned to silence. When the light faded, he was gone. Only the faint echo of his words lingered. Truth is what we decide. Claire knelt, the pendant dimming in her hand, her heart heavy. The house had rendered its judgment. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, faintly, the Queen's voice again, gentle this time, sorrowful. Justice, not vengeance. The light restores, it does not destroy. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. I know, she whispered, it's over now. But even as she said it, she could feel it. Outside, the world wasn't calming, it was igniting. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing, sirens in the distance. The light had drawn more than attention. It had drawn power. The world wanted Ravencourt again, and Claire realized, as she looked up at the ceiling where the Queen's mural glowed faintly, that this was never about possession. It was about responsibility. The truth wasn't safe yet. It had only begun to surface. Transition line for continuity. As the last echoes of the Queen's light faded, Claire knew the reckoning wasn't over, because once the truth rises, it never goes quietly back to sleep. The light that had poured through Ravencourt slowly receded, fading from gold to silver, then to silence. Smoke, like dust, drifted through the air, glimmering in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the cracked dome above. The palace had spoken, and for the first time in its long, tormented life, it was heard. Claire stood alone in the aftermath, the pendant cool in her palm, its glow extinguished. The hum beneath the floor had fallen still. Even the wind that whistled through the broken windows had quieted, as though the house itself was catching its breath. She looked around the study, the walls still warm with faint traces of light. Harlan's shadow burned briefly into the dust before fading like a ghost released. The two guards were gone, not dead, simply gone, vanished into whatever realm the palace used to cleanse its intruders. And then came the sound of the outside world breaking in. The doors, once sealed by the Queen's power, burst open with the force of a dozen boots. Voices shouted orders. Floodlights swept across the room. Government officials, police, news crews. All at once, the living rushed into a place that had belonged to the dead. "Mrs. Donnelly, step away from the debris," a voice shouted. Claire turned slowly, squinting against the glare of lights and camera flashes. Dozens of people stood in the doorway, journalists, agents, and historians, all jostling for position, their expressions a mix of awe and suspicion. She didn't move. The pendant still hung in her hand, its chain glinting faintly. "What happened here?" another voice demanded. There was a seismic reading, an energy surge. The entire hillside lit up like dawn. Claire's lips parted, her voice low but clear. The truth finally woke up. Cameras flashed again, a microphone was thrust toward her. "What truth, Mrs. Donnelly? That Ravencourt wasn't cursed," she said. "It was guarding, protecting something pure from men who kept trying to twist it." A murmur rippled through the room. The reporters leaned in closer, sensing the headline that would ignite the world. "But you found the jewels," one insisted. "You discovered the Queen's treasure. Are you claiming it doesn't exist?" Claire shook her head. "It exists, but its worth was never in what it could buy. It was in what it revealed." The flashbulbs fired again, relentless. The air hummed with their hunger. And then, from the back of the crowd, a familiar voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding. "Let her speak." Claire looked up. Dr. Alistair Finch, a local historian she'd met once at the town library, stepped forward. His grey hair was soaked from rain, his clothes rumpled, but his eyes were bright with reverence. He turned to the crowd. "She's right. The inscriptions in the chamber confirm it. The Queen's treasure wasn't gold or jewels, it was knowledge, a decree signed by Amara herself stating that whoever restored Ravencourt to light would inherit its fortune by right of truth, not blood." The room fell utterly silent. Colton, the deputy minister who'd arrived earlier, stepped forward. "That's absurd," he snapped. "The royal archives contain no such decree." "Because your ministry buried it," Finch replied coldly. "You've been sitting on this story for decades. She just brought it back into the light." Every camera swung toward Colton. His jaw tightened, but his words faltered under the collective stare. Claire met his gaze. "The truth doesn't need permission to exist." The crowd erupted, flashes, shouts, questions, the roar of a world hungry for something real. Colton gestured sharply to the officers. "Secure the artifact, the rest of you out." But the palace had other plans. The chandelier above gave a sudden groan. The marble floor vibrated softly, the same pulse that Claire had learned to recognize as warning. The air shimmered faintly, gold threads of light weaving through the cracks in the stone. Claire's voice rose over the noise, calm and resonant. "Don't touch it. You'll just repeat their mistake." The officers hesitated, looking to Colton for direction. He scowled. "She's manipulating you. It's a building, not a spirit." But even as he spoke, the light in the pendant flared a single pulse, bright enough to cast his face in sharp relief. The ceiling mural, long cracked and faded, shimmered back to life. the image of Queen Amara appeared once more, no longer weeping or silent, but radiant. Every light in the room flickered out, only her painted form glowed, her crown gleaming in spectral gold, and then the voice came again, not in anger, but in solemn decree. He who seeks power through truth will find peace. He who silences truth will be silenced. Colton's face drained of color. What is this? The lights exploded back to life. The palace stopped humming. The glow faded, and when it did, something subtle but powerful changed. The air no longer belonged to the ministry or to men with cameras. It belonged to her, to them, the house, the queen, the truth they had resurrected together. Colton backed away, shaken. "This isn't over, Mrs. Donnelly. The government will not let you rewrite history." Claire's expression softened, but her voice was firm. "I'm not rewriting it. I'm restoring it." He glared at her, then turned sharply toward the door. "We'll be in touch." As he left, Finch approached slowly, his voice trembling with awe. "Claire, you did it. You gave her peace." She nodded, though her eyes stayed on the golden beam of light still streaming from the dome. "Peace isn't the end, it's the beginning." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean? Ravencourt doesn't belong to me," she said. "Or the ministry, or even the queen. It belongs to everyone who ever believed truth could survive corruption." Finch's expression softened. "Then what will you do now?" Claire looked toward the staircase, where the sunlight fell like a path. "Tell her story, the right way, every word, every truth. The world buried her once. I won't let it happen again." Outside, the noise of reporters grew louder. Claire stepped through the crowd, her posture straight, her voice steady. Cameras flashed, questions fired, but she didn't flinch. "Mrs. Donnelly, is the curse broken?" She paused at the top of the steps, wind lifting her hair, sunlight blazing against her face. "There was never a curse," she said. "Only guilt, and truth is the only thing that ever sets either free." For a moment, the crowd went silent. Then the questions began again, louder this time, echoing down the stone path as the cameras kept rolling. Claire descended slowly, each step echoing through the courtyard. Behind her, the palace stood tall against the sky, no longer the silhouette of decay, but a monument of light and shadow. The world would spin its stories, twist its versions, try to own what it didn't understand. But the truth was already written, not in ink, not in law, but in light. Ravencourt had been redeemed, and so had she. Transition line for continuity. But as Claire turned one last time to look at the palace, she knew its story wasn't ending, it was just changing hands, as all truths eventually do. After the blaze of revelation faded and the crowds thinned to a whisper at the gates, Claire stood in the doorway of Ravencourt and listened to the wind move through the ruins like breath returning to a tired body. For the first time since she'd laid her hand on the rusted gates, the house did not resist her. It didn't test, or warn, or shudder with memory. It simply received the daylight and let it stay. Work began with small mercies. She tied back her hair, rolled up her sleeves, and started at the threshold where dirt and glass had gathered like silt after a flood. Dust rose in little ghosts as she swept, traveling the beam of the morning sun, drifting toward the vaulted height before dissolving in light. In the foyer, fallen plaster gave way to lines of a design that had waited patiently beneath. Acanthus leaves and thread, fine vines, patterns of a craftsman who had carved time into stone and trusted time to remember him. She did not work alone for long. News, once a tide that threatened to drown her, returned as a tide that carried help. Alistair Finch arrived with a cautious army of archivists and conservators who understood that to touch the past you must first greet it. They came with soft brushes and soft voices, boxes of cotton and linen gloves, solvents that smelled faintly of almond and patience. Some carried ladders, others carried notebooks. All of them carried a posture of respect. They began where the house itself pointed, Beneath the fractured dome, below the mural where storm had once eclipsed the crown, a scaffold rose like a slow-grown tree, plank by plank, into the high air. Claire climbed it with them, her hands finding a rhythm in the tool's gentle clicks and taps. Up close, the painted storm was not violent at all. It was deliberate, layered, and calm, each stroke a decision. They steadied loose tesserae, lifted soot with the breath of brushes, coaxed gold leaf back from the shadow of blackened smoke. Every hour yielded some small recovery, a hand reappearing from ruin, a lily petal returned to the light. In the ballroom, someone unrolled a canvas cloth and set the cracked mirrors on cushioned tables, as if laying old bones to rest before mending. When the mirrors turned their faces to the ceiling again, they caught not a haunted sky, but the measured choreography of restoration. Tools clicked, ladders creaked. The soft scrape of bone folders pressed loose edges to their homes. Where the glass could not be saved, they cut replacements traced from its memory. And when the last shard slid into place, the mirror held the room like a bowl of still water. Ben came on a Thursday afternoon when the noise at the gate ebbed and the air smelled of rain. He stepped through the door carefully, like a boy who remembers a nightmare and finds it waking into morning. He did not ask for treasure. He asked where to help. Claire handed him a broom and a dust mask. He smiled with shy resolve and began at the back, whisking away the cobwebs that looked like lace. When he reached the piano, he paused and touched one key. The note rose no longer dull, thin still, but true, and the workers in the hall lifted their heads as if hearing a bird return to a quiet grove. They found the old servant's passage and cleared it inch by inch, carrying out rotted wood and fragments of past lives. Buttons, clay marbles, a brass thimble pressed thin from use. The corridor breathed easier for it. Hidden vents coughed up a century of soot. A draft that once felt like sighing now felt like air moving on purpose, becoming circulation, becoming health. In the library, they set up lights that hummed with a soft, clean sound, and the shelves took on color again, spines, letters, names, lineage reassembled. Each book that survived wore damage like a scar and dignity like a crown. Alistair brought students from the college, faces bright with the kind of hunger that asks questions for the sake of understanding, not ownership. He paired them with the quiet elders who remembered stories that had not yet learned to turn into history. They sat on drop cloths and stools and spoke as they worked. How the fire had colored the sky a night like this one. How someone's grandmother remembered lilies left at the gate every year. How a cart once rattled down the gravel road at an hour when no cart should rattle at all. Words joined hands across generations. The house listened. Claire listened harder. She began a ledger not of accounts but of gratitude, a book with lines and dates and names. Every person who carried out a bucket or carried up a ladder went into the ledger. Every donation, a note. A local carpenter brought salvage oak and refused payment. A florist dropped off buckets of lilies and asked only that they be placed by the eastern window where sunlight ran like a river. A group of schoolchildren gathered coins in a jar lettered in marker for the Queen, who wasn't bad, for the lady who listened. Claire set the jar on the mantel and cried when no one watched. The ministry returned, thinner in number and thicker in caution, papers folded like shields beneath their arms. Colton walked the perimeter with measured steps and a cautious face, while the journalists photographed him not as a savior but as something ordinary. A man in a grey suit trying to hold a line in sand already wet with tide. He asked for inventories. He received them. He asked for access. He was given it, through glass with gloves, in rooms that smelled of lemon oil and resolve. He tried to own the tone of the place, and found the place owned its tone already. The law edged toward them, slow and grinding. The light outran it. A decision formed not as a declaration but as a path, walked enough times to become visible. The palace would not become private. It would become a promise kept in public. Claire stood at the base of the staircase where the air felt kindest and said it aloud, first to herself, then to Alistair, then to anyone willing to shoulder the idea with her. Ravencourt will open, not as a trophy but as a vow. A museum that was more than exhibits, a home for memory that behaves like light, no hoarding, no hoax, only the journey from shadow to witness. Plans followed, not grandiose, but good. In the great hall, tall cases would hold the jewels not as baubles but as evidence, each stone accompanied by its paragraph of truth, each glimmer anchored by words. The crimson book, Amara's confession, would rest in an archival cradle, its page turned each week by a conservator's careful hands, a living rhythm of revelation. The chamber of oaths would remain sealed to the casual. On appointed days, small groups, led by people who understood silence, would descend with lanterns and respect. The diadem would not be exhibited. It would be safeguarded where it was meant to be, returned to its echo in stone, a crown of light for a place that now wore daylight well. Word carried outward in circles, to the town council who argued over parking and came to agree that some arrivals should walk the last stretch on foot, because reverence starts with effort, to the teachers who asked if children could sit on the marble steps and draw what the house made them feel, to the choir who asked if the ballroom would bear the weight of voices again. Yes, Claire said to their faces, yes to their questions. The palace had said yes to her life when her life was made of no. She would keep saying yes back. Restoration changed the sound of the place. Hammers tapped, but softly, like rain on distant slate. Brushes sighed. Ladders whispered as they shifted. Ropes sang in low notes. New panes found old frames and clicked into belonging with the quietest affirmation. Sunlight learned its old paths and took them again, printing warm geometry across the floors at 10, at noon, at 3, as if the day were a compass rediscovered. In the afternoons, Claire would pause and let the light climb her hands and think how a house might forgive the world by sheer repetition of kindness. At night, when the workers went home and the scaffolds stood like patient trees in a sleeping grove, she walked the perimeter alone. She visited the places that had frightened her, the library door that closed when no hand touched it, the mirror that once held grief like a tide pool, the stair where footfalls without feet had counted off their warnings. They were quiet now, but their silence was not emptiness, it was rest. Sometimes she thought she felt a shift of temperature at her shoulder, a draft shaped almost like a person. Sometimes lilies perfumed the air when there were no lilies near. She did not speak aloud. Gratitude needs no witness. Ben stayed longer each visit. He learned the names of plaster profiles and the method for lifting a fresco's bruise. He asked questions without apology and listened without impatience when the answers arrived from ages away. In the afternoons, he opened the windows that would open and coaxed those that stuck. He mapped the breezes with ribbons of tissue taped to frames, watching the delicate strips lift and lower as if breathing. He bought a roll of tickets on a string and hung it on a nail as a joke card. Mit one to Ravencourt's wind, and it made Claire laugh so hard she had to sit on the stairs to steady herself. Money that had once meant risk, you now meant repair. The jewels would not be sold. They would earn their keep in sight. Grants came from foundations whose names sounded like oaths. Volunteers arrived with skill or with simply their hands, and both were welcome. The ledger fattened with names. A mason named Halliday rebuilt a threshold stone with such tenderness that someone cried watching him. A teenager who had once sprayed his name on the train bridge volunteered to paint the wainscoting, and, in the careful shine of oxblood drying, saw his reflection and stood straighter. When disputes rose, as they must about hours and permits, about stanchions and stair treads, about whether the ballroom should be polished to the impossible shine of before, or left gently matte to honour the weight of what had happened, Claire learned the odd art of letting arguments cool in light. "This place belongs to no single heart," she told them. "Let the room teach us who it is." And the room did teach. The ballroom refused gloss where sorrow had scorched the marble. It accepted a sheen that looked like dawn on a lake, bright but never slick. On a Wednesday evening, the choir came to test the air. 30 voices stood in a loose crescent where the echoes once frightened the living. They sang not a hymn from the palace's past, but a simple melody that knew how to rise and not rush. The first note travelled up the stair, touched the underside of the repaired dome, and returned like a bird with memory in its beak. People cried without drama. Even tools seemed to stop their small industrious noises to listen. Claire stood near the west doors and felt the sound press gently against her sternum like a hand. She thought of Amara, who had loved this place into secrecy, and whispered, "Listen, we are bringing you back to the kind of light that doesn't burn." Letters began to arrive, folded humility in stamped envelopes. Someone in a small town wrote that her grandfather had kept a newspaper clipping about the night Ravencourt burned, and that he would have been glad to see the smoke turned to sunlight. A child sent a drawing of 2 crowns, one on a head and one on a house, and labelled them then and now. A woman who had once cleaned the ministry offices at night wrote that men spoke of the palace like loot, and that she prayed for the day the house would belong to the ones who knelt to pick up its smallest pieces. Claire clipped every letter into the ledger with a brass pin. She did not hoard praise, she stored proof. The ministry came one more time, not to take but to sign. It was not a surrender. Institutions do not know that word. It was a memorandum threaded with careful clauses that recognized stewardship, acknowledged public trust, and drew boundaries with measured ink, enough to keep wolves polite. Colton's signature leaned forward as if trying to exit the line. Claire's signature sat quietly, as if saying, "I will be here when your ink dries and after." When it was done, Alistair brought out a bottle of something amber and old, and they poured it into paper cups, because ceremony can be humble and still be ceremony. They toasted not to victory, but to work, the only thing that proves belief. Claire chose a date, not an anniversary of fire or flood or law. She chose the day the first morning sun had touched the floor after the storm and made a path like a promise. Flyers went out, black letters on cream paper, Ravencourt opens, an invitation to light, no exclamation marks, no breathless claims, just time and place and a drawing of the lily that had survived on the crest when almost nothing else had. The town posted them in shop windows. The school taped one on the cafeteria door. Someone slid one beneath the church bell and tucked another into the seat pocket on the bus that runs the river road. On the final week before the opening, the house smelled of paste and lemon, linen and paint. The gilders rested their brushes. The electricians labelled their law in tidy block letters behind panels no one would see. The docents walked their routes and practiced the art of telling without claiming. Claire adjusted the height of a frame by the width of a fingernail until the portrait's gaze met the visitor's honesty instead of their defense. Ben set a small wooden box at the entrance with a slot and a penciled sign. "Leave a word you found here." The first slip said simply, "Home." On the last evening, she stayed alone as the light thinned to violet. She visited the Chamber of Oaths one more time, the echo of her steps returning like memory softened by distance. She did not open the recess or ask for signs. She laid her hand on the altar stone and let her skin trade warmth with its cool. In the quiet, she thought she heard steps behind her, light, measured, familiar. But when she turned, there was only a curve of gold vein in the marble, catching a last seam of day. She smiled, and it felt like placing a period at the end of a sentence that had finally learned how to end. Back in the great hall, she stood beneath the repaired dome. The storm in the mural no longer looked like threat. It looked like weather passing. The crown in its beam no longer burned. It glowed as if lit from within by breath. The mirrors reflected not fear, but the faces of people who would come and bring their weather and leave their light. She touched the pendant at her throat. It was cool now, and ordinary to any eye but hers. To her, it would always feel like a pulse that had calmed. She turned out the work lights one by one. The house grew darker, then softer, then intimate, like a stage before the curtain. She opened the east window an inch. Night entered on its careful feet. Somewhere outside, a fox barked once. Somewhere inside, a board settled without complaint. She stood at the door and looked back at the room that had once tried to frighten her into running. It was ready, not perfect, not polished into lie. Ready in the truest sense, honest and welcoming, strong enough to hold what would arrive. Morning would bring footsteps, voices, first glances and second chances. She could feel them already, the way a shoreline feels a ship beyond the fog. She closed the door with her hand on the wood instead of the handle, the way you close a book you love without snapping its spine. Outside, stars bit through the clouds above the gables. The gravel gave under her shoes with that soft seaside crunch a child loves. She did not look back again. She didn't need to. The house had learned to keep its own light. As the key turned and the dark thinned toward dawn, she understood that tomorrow the doors would open not to gold but to seeing, and that would be enough to crown the place in truth. The morning arrived quietly. No thunder, no omen, no voice from the walls, only sunlight, soft and honest, spilling through the windows like forgiveness. Dew glistened on the grass, and for the first time in generations, the gates of Ravencourt Palace stood open. Cars lined the old gravel road, but visitors approached mostly on foot, as Claire had asked. They came slowly, reverently, families, students, old men leaning on canes, children clutching sketchbooks, faces half in awe, half in disbelief that a place once cursed could now feel like hope itself. The palace breathed them in. Inside, the halls no longer echoed emptiness. The scent of lilies drifted through the air, mingled with beeswax and polished oak. Sunlight cascaded down the grand staircase, touching the marble like the hand of something divine. Every corner hummed faintly with life. Footsteps, laughter, hushed wonder. Claire stood near the entrance, dressed simply in cream linen, her hair pinned loosely back. There was no speech prepared, no ceremony scripted. She didn't need one. The house itself was her introduction. Alistair Finch stood beside her, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes moist. "You've done it," he whispered. "You've given her back her voice." Claire smiled faintly. "No, she gave it back to all of us." The visitors began to move through the rooms in slow procession. They lingered beneath the restored dome, marveling at the storm mural that now shone with soft translucence. Its painted lightning glimmered as if caught in perpetual sunrise, and the crown within it radiated gentle warmth. Children pointed, artists sketched, elders whispered prayers. In the ballroom, a string quartet played quietly, notes rising and dissolving beneath the chandelier that had once fallen during the storm. It had been rebuilt, crystal by crystal, until it caught the light like tears turned to glass. The music felt like breath moving through old lungs. Claire walked among the visitors unnoticed at first, her steps light, her hands trailing along the railings she had once feared to touch. She paused before the mirror where she had first found the hidden map, and in its reflection she no longer saw ghosts, only faces filled with curiosity, faces of the living carrying on the story of the dead. At the far end of the hall stood the exhibit case holding the jewels. They no longer glowed. They rested under low light, each one labeled not by its worth, but by the passage it belonged to in Queen Amara's diary. A small plaque read, "These stones witnessed more than they shone. May they remind us that light unguarded becomes greed, but light remembered becomes grace." Visitors read in silence, some with tears in their eyes. In the library, volunteers guided small groups through the shelves, where the Queen's writings were displayed alongside restoration notes and sketches of the palace's history. Ben stood there, explaining to a group of students how he and his mother had found the chest. His voice carried a pride that wasn't boastful. It was gentle, like someone speaking of a wound that had healed. When he saw Claire at the doorway, he grinned. "Mom, they asked if the tunnels are real." Claire smiled. "Tell them they are. But some doors only open when the house decides you're ready." Laughter rippled through the group, but in their eyes lingered the same reverence she had felt her first night here, the feeling of being chosen by history rather than intruding upon it. She continued through the corridors, her pace unhurried. In every room, she saw traces of both the Queen's sorrow and the world's redemption. The repaired frescoes, the unsealed staircases, the warmth returning to the cold stone. The palace was no longer a relic, it was a living memory evolving in the hands of those who respected it. As she entered the great hall again, a soft hush fell. The choir began to sing, the same melody they had tested in the empty hall weeks ago, now swelling with harmony that filled every crevice. Their voices rose up, carrying through the open dome. Sunlight turned golden against the ceiling, illuminating the crest of the Queen's lily. The air shimmered faintly, almost imperceptibly, and for a single heartbeat, Claire thought she saw her again, Queen Amara, standing in the light with that familiar grace, her hands folded, her eyes proud. Then, as quickly as it came, the vision dissolved into sunlight. Claire smiled through her tears. A journalist approached carefully, microphone lowered out of respect. "Mrs. Donnelly," he said softly, "people are calling this a miracle, a rebirth. What do you call it?" She turned toward the mural, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "Not a miracle," she said. "A correction." He blinked. "A correction." She nodded. "The palace was never cursed. It was silenced. We just gave it back its truth." The reporter lowered his camera. For once, no one asked another question. Outside, bells rang faintly from the nearby church. No schedule, no reason, just sound carried on the wind like a benediction. The townspeople began lighting lanterns along the path to the gates, each one a small sphere of amber light, swaying in the evening breeze. As dusk deepened, the visitors gathered in the courtyard. Claire stepped out to meet them, the air cool and gentle on her face. The palace loomed behind her, no longer a monument to tragedy but a silhouette of grace against the fading sky. Ben came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Claire looked up at the palace, where the last rays of sun kissed the repaired dome. "Now," she smiled, "now we keep the promise." He frowned slightly. "What promise?" "That truth will never stay buried again." The courtyard lights flickered on, golden halos lining the gravel. The first visitors began to leave, their footsteps soft, their faces peaceful. Some looked back at the palace one last time before stepping into the night, as though reluctant to part with the feeling it had given them. Claire lingered after they were gone. The staff extinguished the lanterns one by one until only the faint glow of the chandelier remained inside. The house stood tall and silent, bathed in moonlight, its windows gleaming like eyes that finally rested without fear. She looked down at the pendant in her pommets once, brilliant light now only a memory, but warm to the touch, as if it still remembered her heartbeat. She lifted it toward the palace. "Your home," she whispered. The wind stirred gently through the courtyard, and somewhere deep within the house, a door creaked open and closed again, softly, almost tenderly, as if answering her. Claire smiled. The palace that once devoured dreams had learned to protect them. The house that had been the queen's burden had become her legacy, and now hers too. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing faintly on the cobblestones. Overhead, the moon broke through the clouds, painting the palace in silver. And as she reached the gate, she looked back one final time. Light shimmered faintly behind the upper windows, not electric, not candle, but the kind of light that exists only when history forgives itself. Transition line for continuity. The palace stood reborn in the moonlight, and as Claire walked away, she knew that what they had restored was never just stone and gold. It was the courage to turn pain into purpose. Years later, the wind still carried the scent of lilies through the open corridors of Ravencourt. But now it mingled with laughter, children's laughter, clear and unafraid, echoing down halls that once only knew silence. The palace that had been a monument to sorrow had become a living heart again. The marble floors gleamed under soft morning light, the kind that made the air look like it was spun from gold. Visitors wandered slowly through the great hall, tracing their fingers along the velvet ropes, whispering to one another about the woman who had brought this place back to life, the woman who listened to the walls. Claire Donnelly's story had become legend, though she never told it that way. In the local museum brochures, her name appeared not in bold letters, but quietly, beneath a simple inscription. Curator and keeper of Ravencourt, she returned light to its home. Time had softened her face, but not her spirit. Her hair, streaked now with silver, framed eyes that still held that same steady glow, the look of a woman who had once faced a house of ghosts and found a soul within it. Every morning, she walked the grounds before the gates opened to the public. The gravel crunched softly under her shoes, and the dew soaked the hems of her coat. She always stopped at the east wing, where the first sun touched the restored stained glass. The window depicted Queen Amara standing before the palace, holding not a crown but an open book. The inscription below read, "The truth shall crown the keeper." Claire would pause there, her breath catching each time, because no matter how many years passed, the words still felt like they were meant for her, a message across centuries, sealed not in gold, but in purpose. Inside, the palace had found a new rhythm. The ballroom had become a gallery for the Queen's recovered writings and sketches, pages of hope inked between lines of heartbreak. The servants' quarters were now classrooms where children painted and wrote essays about history, truth, and courage. The west corridor, once sealed, feared, and broken, had been rebuilt into a reflection hall, its mirrors polished and arranged to scatter sunlight into endless beams. And every evening, just before closing, Claire would light a single candle in the Chamber of Oaths. No one else was allowed down there. Not because of superstition, but because some promises weren't meant to be shared, only honored. She would descend the steps slowly, her footsteps careful, her heart steady. The air in the chamber was always cool, still faintly perfumed with the scent of aged stone and wax. The marble altar stood as she had last seen it, unchanged, eternal. The diadem still rested in its recess, sleeping beneath the wall's translucent seal. Its light no longer pulsed outward, it didn't need to. Peace had replaced vigilance, Claire would place the candle before it and whisper, "We kept our word." For a moment she would swear she could hear it, a soft hum, like the palace exhaling in gratitude. Then she would rise, close the door, and climb back toward the daylight, carrying that faint warmth in her chest like a heartbeat that would never fade. Outside, the gardens had flourished. Roses climbed the trellises. Lilies bloomed in wide beds near the reflecting pool. Ben had designed the layout himself, simple, symmetrical, filled with the kinds of flowers that symbolized renewal. He visited often now, taller, steadier, his once boyish grin tempered by quiet wisdom. One afternoon, as Claire walked with him along the gravel path, he said, "You know, people still think there's treasure hidden somewhere in the palace." She smiled faintly. "There is." He looked at her, puzzled. She pointed to the children running through the fountain mist, their laughter ringing against the marble. That's what the Queen wanted to protect. Ben nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. "Do you ever still feel her? The Queen, I mean." Claire's gaze drifted toward the upper windows, where sunlight caught on the glass and shimmered like movement, almost like a silhouette. "Not as before," she said softly. "She doesn't need to linger. When truth is remembered, ghosts can rest." They reached the great staircase, where a plaque now stood, dedicated to Queen Amara of Ravencourt, whose courage preserved truth for those not yet born. Beneath it, a second line read, restored by Claire Donnelly, who answered the call of silence. Tourists often stopped there to take photos, unaware that the woman in the background dusting the railings was the same name on the plaque. She never corrected them. Her work wasn't about recognition. It was about stewardship, about honoring the hands that came before hers and ensuring the next ones would inherit something better. Later that day, Claire stood beneath the dome once more. The choir had gathered again, not for ceremony, but for tradition. Every year on the anniversary of the restoration, they sang the same song, the one they had tested when the palace was half rebuilt. Their voices rose like a tide, soft at first, then swelling until the air itself seemed to glow. Claire closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She remembered the first time she'd stood there trembling, afraid, surrounded by shadows. Now, those same walls sang back to her, bright and alive. When the song ended, applause filled the hall. The sound wasn't loud or wild. It was pure reverent, the kind of sound that leaves space for silence afterward, so memory can breathe. As the visitors dispersed, Claire remained alone beneath the mural of Queen Amara's storm. The light through the dome painted gold across her face. She whispered, "You were right. The crown was never for kings." The air shifted, faintly warm. Dust motes rose in the sunlight, swirling like gold threads, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she heard the Queen's voice again, soft, tender, almost amused. "And yet you wore it anyway, keeper." A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek, but she smiled through it. "Only because you taught me how." Outside, the bells of the town began to ring again, signaling the end of the day. The sound drifted through the open doors, folding into the palace's stillness like a lullaby. Claire turned toward the exit, her heart full but light. She walked slowly down the corridor, the echo of her steps harmonizing with the fading song of the bells. Behind her, the palace shimmered one last time in the sunlight, gold on white, shadow and memory woven together. It no longer felt like a monument. It felt like home. Transition line for continuity. But as twilight descended over Ravencourt and the candlelight flickered against the marble, Claire realized that the legacy they had restored wasn't the Queen's alone. It was hers to pass forward, one truth at a time. The night settled over Ravencourt like velvet laid by gentle hands. The visitors had gone, the laughter fading beyond the gates. Lanterns along the path flickered softly, their reflections trembling in the pools below the terrace. Inside, the palace stood quiet, not empty, but content. Claire walked through its corridors one last time that evening, her fingertips brushing the walls as if to say goodbye after a long conversation. The marble was cool and smooth under her palm, but it carried warmth memory from the countless hands that had helped restore it. In the library, the faint scent of leather and wax lingered. The books stood like sentinels, their spines aligned in solemn pride. The diary of Queen Amara rested in its glass case beneath a single lamp. Its pages were open to the last entry, the one written in trembling ink on the eve of her disappearance. Claire paused before it, reading once more, though she knew the words by heart. If truth survives me, then I have not died in vain. Let those who find these walls remember that the light we protect is never ours to own, only ours to guard. The candlelight shimmered across the ink, as if the Queen's hand had just left the page. Claire smiled softly. "You were right, Your Majesty," she whispered. "The light wasn't meant for one life. It's meant for every life that touches it." A quiet wind moved through the open window, stirring the curtains, carrying the faint echo of music, the last notes from the town below. The air smelled of lilies again. She closed the case gently, the soft click sounding final and peaceful. Then she made her way toward the grand staircase, her footsteps slow, thoughtful. Every portrait she passed seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. The faces of monarchs and courtiers who once ruled with power now looked softer, as if humbled by time. The Queen's portrait hung at the landing, newly restored, her eyes alive with compassion, her lips curved in the faintest knowing smile. Claire paused, gazing up at her. "You were never forgotten," she said. "Only misunderstood," and for a heartbeat she thought she saw the Queen's reflection in the glass blink, slow, graceful, approving. Claire reached the upper gallery, where the moonlight spilled across the repaired dome. The mural above no longer showed a storm. The restorers had left it half, as it was, one side swirling with clouds, the other clear and calm. Between them, the crown hovered in radiant balance. It wasn't perfection. It was honesty. From below, she heard faint footsteps, Ben's voice calling softly. "Mom," she leaned over the railing, smiling. "I'm here." He appeared in the hall, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. His hair was windswept, his eyes bright with the same light that had carried them through every trial. "I figured you'd still be wandering," he said, climbing the stairs. "Couldn't let you end the day without this." Claire took the cup with a grateful laugh. "You've learned the secret. Restoration doesn't end, it just changes shape." They stood side by side beneath the dome, sipping their tea in silence. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the glass, carrying the scent of rain that would come by morning. After a while, Ben said quietly, "Do you think she knows, the Queen, I mean, that we finished what she started?" Claire's gaze drifted upward to the mural. "Oh, she knows. But it's not just her story anymore." Ben nodded slowly, taking in the palace that surrounded them, the glimmering floors, the murals, the faint hum of life returning. "You really think places can forgive?" She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I think places remember what people forget. And when we finally listen, forgiveness is just the echo of being understood." They stood in silence for a long time, the moonlight turning silver on their faces. Then, somewhere deep within the palace, a faint sound rose, not the hum of electricity or the whisper of wind, but something older, softer. Music. The piano in the ballroom playing by unseen hands. A single melody, familiar and fragile, weaving through the stillness. Ben's eyes widened. "That's..." Claire smiled through her tears. "The Queen's waltz." They listened, neither afraid nor surprised. The music filled the corridors, gentle as memory, strong as legacy. Each note lingered like a heartbeat that refused to fade. When the final chord trembled into silence, the palace sighed once more, settling into peace. Claire set her cup down and looked out across the hall. "She's saying good-bye." Ben's voice was soft. "And thank you." Claire nodded. "No, she's reminding us it's our turn now." They walked together toward the balcony overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool, carrying the rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of crickets. The palace lights glowed behind them, casting their silhouettes onto the terrace. Far below, the fountain reflected the moon like a second sky. The lilies swayed gently in the breeze, their white petals gleaming like stars fallen to earth. Claire leaned against the railing, closing her eyes. "When I first came here," she said quietly, "I thought I was buying a ruin, a mistake. I didn't know. I was buying a second chance." Ben smiled faintly. "For you, for her," she said. Then, after a pause, "and for me." He looked out at the gardens, then back at her. "You know, they're talking about naming the new museum wing after you." She chuckled softly. "They can name the broom closet after me if they want. I just want people to leave here believing that truth doesn't die with the people who tell it." He studied her face for a moment. "You've become what she was." Claire shook her head gently. "No, I've become what she hoped someone would be." The wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of rain and roses. The clouds parted just enough for the moon to cast a perfect circle of light across the gardens. For a moment, Claire thought she saw two figures standing there, one in shadow, one in silver reflections only the night could conjure. She didn't blink, she didn't question, she simply smiled. The vision faded, leaving only the shimmer of the fountain and the hush of peace. "Come on," Ben said softly, "it's late." She nodded, taking one last look at the palace, the home that had been curse, trial, teacher, and salvation. "Good night, Ravencourt," she whispered. As they walked down the staircase together, the chandelier above swayed gently, scattering light across the walls like scattered jewels, a final blessing. The doors closed behind them with a sound that wasn't final, but eternal. And when the wind swept through the corridors once more, carrying the echo of a waltz through marble and time, it sounded almost like laughter, the kind shared between two souls, centuries apart, who finally understood each other. Final closing line. As dawn rose over Ravencourt, the palace no longer belonged to the ghosts of the past. It belonged to every soul brave enough to rebuild, to forgive, and to keep the light alive. The visitors had gone, the laughter fading beyond the gates. Lanterns along the path flickered softly, their reflections trembling in the pools below the terrace. Inside, the palace stood quiet, not empty, but content. Claire walked through its corridors one last time that evening, her fingertips brushing the walls as if to say goodbye after a long conversation. The marble was cool and smooth under her palm, but it carried warmth memory from the countless hands that had helped restore it. In the library, the faint scent of leather and wax lingered. The books stood like sentinels, their spines aligned in solemn pride. The diary of Queen Amara rested in its glass case beneath a single lamp. Its pages were open to the last entry, the one written in trembling ink on the eve of her disappearance. Claire paused before it, reading once more, though she knew the words by heart. Asterisk, "If truth survives me, then I have not died in vain. Let those who find these walls remember that the light we protect is never ours to own, only ours to guard." Asterisk, the candlelight shimmered across the ink, as if Queen's hand had just left the page. Claire smiled softly. "You were right, Your Majesty," she whispered. "The light wasn't meant for one life. It's meant for every life that touches it." A quiet wind moved through the open window, stirring the curtains, carrying the faint echo of music, the last notes from the town below. The air smelled of lilies again. She closed the case gently, the soft click sounding final and peaceful. Then she made her way toward the grand staircase, her footsteps slow, thoughtful. Every portrait she passed seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. The faces of monarchs and courtiers who once ruled with power now looked softer, as if humbled by time. The Queen's portrait hung at the landing, newly restored, her eyes alive with compassion, her lips curved in the faintest knowing smile. Claire paused, gazing up at her. "You were never forgotten," she said. "Only misunderstood." And for a heartbeat, she thought she saw the Queen's reflection in the glass blink, slow, graceful, approving. Claire reached the upper gallery, where the moonlight spilled across the repaired dome. The mural above no longer showed a storm. The restorers had left it half, as it was, one side swirling with clouds, the other clear and calm. Between them, the crown hovered in radiant balance. It wasn't perfection. It was honesty. From below, she heard faint footsteps, Ben's voice calling softly. "Mom?" She leaned over the railing, smiling. "I'm here." He appeared in the hall, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. His hair was windswept, his eyes bright with the same light that had carried them through every trial. "I figured you'd still be wandering," he said, climbing the stairs. "Couldn't let you end the day without this." Claire took the cup with a grateful laugh. "You've learned the secret. Restoration doesn't end, it just changes shape." They stood side by side beneath the dome, sipping their tea in silence. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the glass, carrying the scent of rain that would come by morning. After a while, Ben said quietly, "Do you think she knows, the Queen, I mean, that we finished what she started?" Claire's gaze drifted upward to the mural. "Oh, she knows, but it's not just her story anymore." Ben nodded slowly, taking in the palace that surrounded them, the glimmering floors, the murals, the faint hum of life returning. "You really think places can forgive?" She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I think places remember what people forget. And when we finally listen, forgiveness is just the echo of being understood." They stood in silence for a long time, the moonlight turning silver on their faces. Then, somewhere deep within the palace, a faint sound rose, not the hum of electricity or the whisper of wind, but something older, softer, music. The piano in the ballroom playing by unseen hands, a single melody, familiar and fragile, weaving through the stillness. Ben's eyes widened. "That's—" Claire smiled through her tears. "The Queen's waltz." They listened, neither afraid nor surprised. The music filled the corridors, gentle as memory, strong as legacy. Each note lingered like a heartbeat that refused to fade. When the final chord trembled into silence, the palace sighed once more, settling into peace. Claire set her cup down and looked out across the hall. "She's saying goodbye." Ben's voice was soft. "And thank you." Claire nodded. "No, she's reminding us it's our turn now." They walked together toward the balcony overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool, carrying the rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of crickets. The palace lights glowed behind them, casting their silhouettes onto the terrace. Far below, the fountain reflected the moon like a second sky. The lilies swayed gently in the breeze, their white petals gleaming like stars fallen to earth. Claire leaned against the railing, closing her eyes. "When I first came here," she said quietly, "I thought I was buying a ruin, a mistake. I didn't know. I was buying a second chance." Ben smiled faintly. "For you, for her," she said. Then, after a pause, "and for me." He looked out at the gardens, then back at her. "You know, they're talking about naming the new museum wing after you." She chuckled softly. "They can name the broom closet after me if they want. I just want people to leave here believing that truth doesn't die with the people who tell it." He studied her face for a moment. "You've become what she was." Claire shook her head gently. No, I've become what she hoped someone would be. The wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of rain and roses. The clouds parted just enough for the moon to cast a perfect circle of light across the gardens. For a moment, Claire thought she saw two figures standing there, one in shadow, one in silver reflections only the night could conjure. She didn't blink. She didn't question. She simply smiled. The vision faded, leaving only the shimmer of the fountain and the hush of peace. "Come on," Ben said softly. "It's late." She nodded, taking one last look at the palace, the home that had been curse, trial, teacher, and salvation. "Good night, Ravencourt," she whispered. As they walked down the staircase together, the chandelier above swayed gently, scattering light across the walls like scattered jewels, a final blessing. The doors closed behind them with a sound that wasn't final, but eternal. And when the wind swept through the corridors once more, carrying the echo of a waltz through marble and time, it sounded almost like laughter, the kind shared between two souls, centuries apart, who finally understood each other.